Hey, good afternoon. My name is Brooklyn Lou, and I was going to do this live, hoping to chat with some people of any faith at all. But I did want to just touch on what's going on in mega churches. I mean, I live in the United States, so I'm looking at the news and seeing all kinds of just horrible things that are going on in big churches around the country. The last one that I've been reading about is the International House of Prayer. This was a very big ministry, known all over the world. This ministry was started by a guy named Mike Bickle, and the idea was that they would have 24-hour a day prayer going on, praying 24 hours a day for the world, right? And it was primarily geared towards young people. Young people from all over came and volunteered, and they did a lot of work. Right now, I'm not a Christian, so for me, it's not something that I would be involved in. But I respect people of all different beliefs, and I certainly respect Christians if they want to get together and pray. But the problem with the International House of Prayer, it turns out that the leader, Mike Bickle, had been abusing women since the 1970s, and it was covered up, right? And this seems to be a systemic problem in churches in America. It seems like whenever there's something horrible going on behind the scenes, people cover it up. Church leadership covers it up, and it becomes just a situation where nobody is willing to come forward. And sometimes this actually goes on for decades, which is really sad. Right now, Christianity, to me, is based upon following leaders, right? I mean, all Christians are called to follow Jesus as their leader, but it comes down to following leaders in the real world, doesn't it? So what we see is certain leaders who have charismatic abilities and the ability to rise through the ranks seem to get the attention of Christians all over the world. It's as though Christians are looking for leadership all the time. Now, I don't get that because as an atheist, I like to think for myself and I'm my own leader. But in Christianity, there seems to be this thing where Christians always are looking for the next leader, the next anointed one. All right. And I think that this leads to this gullibility where they can be led by corrupt men. And it's pretty scary. I mean, here's a religion based on love. I mean, that's what you hear. And yet we see behind the scenes, once it's exposed, that there is just terrible, evil men, corrupt men running these organizations. And I'd love to talk to anyone about any experiences they might have in church. Even if it's a positive one, that's okay. I like to know, what's going on in this in this world, but it's not looking good for Christianity. It's not a good statement, and it's not indicative of a religion of love when we see abuse of children and of women and financial corruption at the highest levels, and it's covered up for decades. It just seems like a horrible, horrible thing, and it must be stopped. And I know that Christians are the ones who must stop this. Christians must speak out, and they must let their voices be heard that they don't want this in their churches. They don't want corrupt men abusing children and women. They don't want corrupt men making millions and millions of dollars off of fake stories and charismatic abilities to speak. All right. This is not the best that Christianity can offer. All right. And it's been going on just for decades and decades. I remember when I was much younger, Jim Baker and Tammy Faye, and how they rose through, the Christian ether, and they rose to the top of having much influence. And we all know that Jim and Tammy had their own problems, and yet it was hidden from the public, right, until it finally gets exposed. And then we have Christians running around shocked. Oh, my goodness. All right. But we know that people knew about this. We know that people knew Jim Baker had homosexual tendencies, and that came out, of course. And we know that he was vulnerable to all kinds of temptations, right? We learned later about Jessica Hahn, a simple secretary who was spiritually abused as well as physically abused by Jim Baker, right? And it was horrible, right? It was terrible watching the fall of Jimmy Swaggart, all right? Having him to come on television and cry and, ooh, I disobeyed my God and I've let him down. Right? The funny thing to me is it always comes out after they've made their millions, right? It never seems to come out before they make their millions. It's as though, in Christianity, you can make your millions and millions so that you have a safe landing for when it comes out that you were just a charlatan and just abusing people for generations, for decades. But they never lose their money, do they? They always have a lot of money, right? A lot of money that they've earned off of doing scams on the people that follow them, begging for money for God, that sort of thing that we see every day. God is always needing your money. And these charlatans are always there and ready to be the recipient of that money that you want to donate to God. All right. It's just disgraceful. All right. What is going on in this country with churches being run as businesses? All right. That they're just organizations meant to rake in millions and millions of dollars. And the importance that they place is always on the ministry. The ministry must continue. The ministry must go forth. Right? It's never about actual people. Okay. because people literally are secondary. Right? It's never about people for these mega churches and these spiritual abusers. It's never about people. And it's always about the ministry, right? The institution, the church of God. It's always that that is of the utmost importance. And it's just horrible. And if there is anybody that wants to chat today, please come up. You can chat in the chat room, or you can use the link that I'm posting right now. I'd love to hear from Christians who may have their own stories about how a church might have abused them. Right? And I know it doesn't have to lead to you losing your faith, because your faith can be in Jesus, number one, and all the men who are corrupt, don't have to become an idol to you. But unfortunately, it happens a lot. Christians seem to make idols of men and women, right, who are influential, who have the power of persuasion, who are charismatic, right? And that just seems to lead to so much abuse. The dynamic is that there are leaders who are much more important than the followers. But there are few leaders and there are millions and millions of followers. So the leaders get the benefit and the power of all those followers just giving to them. Almost like in idolatry, almost worshiping these people as though they are God themselves. All right. And when you give men or women that type of power, right, it's a scary thing. Right? When you just hand over your thinking to a man in a pulpit who's driving a Rolls Royce, who lives in a mansion, who has the yachts, right, and the trust funds, and you just give that man your mind and you follow that man, all right, don't be surprised if that man is going to end up abusing you or your family, because he doesn't respect you, right? There's no way he can respect you like he respects himself, because he feels he is the anointed one. He is the one who is anointed by God, right? He's the one who God is using. God is not using you. You see, you're just a regular working person. You're not having the power and the influence that the man of God has, right? So it's easy for them even to buy into their own press and to become believers in their own anointing, you see? And there are always Christians just waiting for that type of leader. They're just waiting for that type of person to put their faith in, all right, to believe that that is the person that God wants them to serve. Because let's face it, in Christianity, it's always about serving somebody, right? It's always you are not good enough by yourself. All right. You are wicked. You are your righteousness. All you can do is like filthy rags. But there's a man of God standing up there. All right. Now that man is anointed. God is using them. Okay. And you fall for it all the time. And it's horrible. All right. And these churches are tax exempt. They're run just like a business. They're non-transparent. People do not know the people who are teaching them from the platform, from the stage, because let's face it, it's a stage, because we all know it's a show. Okay. I mean, they have green rooms at these big churches. Green rooms. You know, green rooms comes out of the entertainment business. That's where green rooms come from. It's the place where the entertainers get to spend time, right? And they get catered to, and they get ready to put on their show. And at mega churches, they have green rooms, and they call them green rooms, where the entertainers get to stay before they put on their show. But there are Christians, gullible, naive people who don't understand this. And they think that the person putting on the show somehow cares about them and their situation. And it couldn't be further from the truth. When a man is making millions of dollars and he's doing it from the donations of people who think they are giving to God, but instead are giving to a greedy man, that's just being gullible, my friends. It's being gullible, right? If anyone cares to talk, please come in. I would love to talk, and it can be about anything. Just here killing time this afternoon. And if you want to talk about anything, feel free to come in. I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to get a drink for a second, and I'll be right back. Hey, back. SBC Cave, how you doing? I just had to go and get a drink, little Monster Energy to keep me going. Today I was thinking a lot about mega churches. Oh yeah, glad you're not doing too bad. Hope everything is well for you. Right, I was thinking a lot about mega churches and spiritual abuse. Right, it's just tragic what is going on at these big churches where one after the other just come tumbling down. Right, it's so much abuse of individuals at the expense of lifting up an institution. It's just awful. And whether you're a Christian, not Christian, whatever, I think most of us can agree it's awful when an institution systemically abuses people, sometimes for decades, and covers it up. I think that is just horrible. Just despicable. Right? I've been thinking a lot about this spiritual abuse. Right? How there's a dynamic. All right, there's a dynamic where there's leadership, and then there's everybody else. And you know, when a leader approaches someone who is not in leadership, there is this dynamic where there's a power difference. And these pastors who abuse people, they prey upon that. It's nothing more than like a groomer who is preparing their victim. Right? And it's a terrible thing to say and to see. And I wish more Christians would speak out. It shouldn't be an atheist like me talking about it. It should be Christians who should be totally upset with this type of thing going on. No, I didn't see that movie, but it would be something I should watch. Right? I know the Catholic Church obviously has had a tremendous amount of abuse, right, in the past, and it was covered up, which is the standard operating procedure, right? Oh, I have seen Not by Sight News. I've watched some of his stuff. I like it. Very interesting. You know, I mean that's a place where I see a Christian man taking a stand against, you know, some of this abuse that's going on in churches, and I applaud that. I subscribe to him, by the way, right? And I applaud what he's doing. Right? As an atheist, I applaud what he's doing. There's a couple other groups out there, Christian organizations that I also support that are doing the same thing, kind of exposing the evil that's going on within Christian churches. All right. Been following a little bit this reporter, Julie Roy's. Been seeing some of her stuff. And at least she's trying to speak out. And she's very Christian. I've seen her speak at Christian events. And it's a joy to see that to me. Because I'm not against Christians. Right? I speak out against beliefs that I disagree with, but I want the best for Christians. And it breaks my heart to see anyone abused for decades and the people around them just, shh, don't tell anybody. It's terrible, just terrible, you know. So yeah, so nice to see you, SBC Cave. Ah. SBC Cave. What does SBC stand for? Single board computers. You're into fixing them or building them? I actually sell computers. That's what I do for a living, by the way. Hey, Scott, I see you over there. I'm going to pop you in now. Hey, Scott.
Hey man, how's it going?
All right. Little not too active, but I like to come on like I told you one other time. I just pop on when I think I want to talk to some people, you know?
Yeah. I was
Glad to see you today.
yeah man, I was actually took the day off from work today, so that's the only way I got you today, and I'm glad I did.
You know, Scott, I'm wondering what your take is on the spiritual abuse and the corruption that we're seeing in Christian megachurches. Because, I mean, obviously it's in the news all the time, right? You
Mhm.
know, this church, the latest is IHOP, the International House of Prayer,
Prayer, yeah.
not the pancake company.
Don't give them a bad name.
But that's like the latest, right? But it's not the only thing. It's like it goes from one thing to another,
Yeah.
right? And it's certainly not a good thing. And I didn't mean like to come on today and actually talk about like how I disagree with Christianity, but it's more like, why does this go on? I mean,
Yeah.
because I don't think Christians, they're horrified too, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not something they want to see in their churches, you
Oh,
know.
absolutely. They're embarrassed by it, you know.
Yeah, and
They're
and
embarrassed. And you know,
yes,
my whole thing about that is it's it's shocking and outstanding because it happens in the church. You know, it's like we forget that humans are humans and do what humans do. Um, and religion is no different. It's not like there's some special magic power that keeps them, shielded from evil or shielded from committing evil and things like that. I mean, we see, abuse in the Boy Scouts. We see corruption and abuse in the Boy Scouts. We see it in all kinds of organizations, government, schools. It's rampant. If you focus on that, it can be rampant. But it's just the nature of being who we are as a people, and there's a flip side to this, and I would say that I will try to spin it to be like kind of a positive thing if I could, is that well, if you think about it, everything is sort of defined by its opposite, right? Like you can't really show love or express love. I think love is like an expression, right? You can't really express love unless there's a reason to do so. So there has to be some kind of opposite out there that you're loving against, that gives you that tension, that gives you that reason for doing that. There's some kind of symmetry. And that's always the case in reality, that everything is like the yin and the yang, so to speak. It's like a symmetry, and everything's sort of defined by it. So, what this does for the Christian is it challenges you to stand up and fight for what's good and eradicate that stuff out of your organization. If you love your church and you love your organization and you love your pastor and your people in your church family, then it seems like you should either do one of two things. You can walk away from it in hopes that you'll find something better in someone else's yard, which you won't, or you can fight to make it a better place. You can give yourself purpose. You can be a force for good. You can coalesce people. You can be the thing that you want your church to be, and stand up against the evil, stand up against the wrongdoing, and set a good example. That would be my advice, maybe, or and entailed in my perspective.
Well, I think that's that's all. I agree with all that, right? But there's this element that I'm fascinated with, and it's that in the Christian churches, in that dynamic, in that environment, there seems to be this reluctance to ever speak out against the institution. It's like the institution is more important than people, and that is something I think is just a very bad thing that's going on, and I don't know why it just continues to go on. It's like such a frustrating thing, right? It's like, do people ever learn? It's like the institution is to be protected, it seems. Like in these stories, the one thing I see like a thread throughout them is that people knew about it, right? They knew about these abuses, and yet they kept their mouth shut, right?
Mm-hmm.
They kept their mouth shut to not rock the boat, right? Because I think Christians feel that if they rock the boat, it's as though they're hurting Christ, right?
Yes.
And it makes no sense ultimately, because if you're a Christian and you really believe in Christ, I mean, shouldn't Christ be able to handle his own PR?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like, why
that's
why are they running around trying to, well, I can't say anything because it will hurt the cause of Christ, and yet Christ is, God. He is the one capable of changing everyone's minds, right?
it's
So
like why does he need spokespeople?
yeah, it's exactly that. But especially when you have to hide the truth, thinking that you're helping Christ, right?
Hmm.
And that's what I see. It's like people watch these abuses and they go, oh no, but I can't say anything because it'll hurt the cause of Christ.
Hmm. Yeah, because they've been taught or indoctrinated to believe that the words of the church, the words of the tradition, or the words of the holy text is first and foremost. That's where the truth is. So they've sort of looked at that as the truth that needs to be protected, and their purpose in life is to be the energy, the resource to defend it. And then God's on high, saying, I could step in and defend myself, but no, I want to see what my little people are going to do. Where are my real friends at? Yeah, I can fight my own battles, but where are my real friends at? They should be right there ready to fight. You know what I mean? Like, they may look at it like, this is my chance to prove to God, he set this whole problem up, and now he's doing this as a test to see if I'm going to really be his soldier or if I'm just going to cower out. It's like a test of faith or whatever. And this is the kind of thinking that's been inculcated in organized religions for thousands of years. It's a power move, it's a power grab. It's the same thing with governments. They operate kind of the same way. Usually organizations, they're hierarchical structures, you know, and you're at the bottom and you're kind of there to feed the power structure.
Yes.
Kind of like an analogy is kind of like the Matrix. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but that makes like a really good analogy of, the subjects of the kingdom whose only purpose is to power the batteries, power the matrix, and give the upper people what they need. And that's usually how power structures work to begin with. But it's really sad in religion because religion is supposed to be spiritual, and by spiritual they mean transcendent from, our common day experience. Yet they play right into the same narratives. They play right into the same separations, the same dualism, the same, structures. It's the same thing. Nothing's ever different there. It's just that they put the name God on it, um, to enforce, even stronger. Like, people will be more willing to die for God in the name of God than they'll be willing to die for, let's say, hunger or things that they really want to eradicate in the world that really exist. They'd rather die
Right.
for a concept, some sort of
Right.
ideal.
That's and they could even be abused and not
That's the
say a
point.
word because they don't want to disturb the concept.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of these victims, they stay quiet, for so long,
Yeah.
right? Because they don't want to disturb the concept.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I
It's
don't, like I can't relate to that anymore because I feel like I'm. A free thinker.
mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe I'm too free in a sense because I'm kind of lonely. I mean, I have relationships, but I don't have a whole bunch of them, you know. So it's like I only relate to a handful of people on a regular basis. All right,
Same
so it's
here.
not like I have this big thing, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like I can't even imagine like being in a spot where I'm being abused by an institution and then saying, "Oh, it's more important. The institution is more important than the abuse I'm suffering." Right?
And or even your conscience. Like, when I was once, a Jehovah Witness, as you know, and I had responsibilities, and I may have told you the story where the lady's child was molested by one of the elders and ended up disfellowshipping the lady for smoking cigarettes instead of disfellowshipping the elder. Instead, just move him to another location. And in that case, the decision was made because it would just make the organization look bad. And they
Right.
couldn't afford that. So it's better to get rid of the loudmouth over here than
Right.
to get rid of the real problem. We can kind of shuffle that under the covers and sort of get rid of that whole problem, make it go away that way. So that was more important than justice, which is a damn shame because it's not about justice. It's about promoting a false belief, and promoting an organization. And believe me, like you said earlier, these people continue to make millions and millions of dollars off the income of other people. And yeah, while some of them do great, and I don't mean to disparage all churches. There's a lot of churches that do, a lot of good in the world. And hats off to you. Good deal. That's great. We need more of that and less of the corruption. And these mega churches, kind of like, I can kind of group them a little separate than these, you know, other churches in the community that actually do good things for people.
Hey, I'm all with you on that. And in my experience in Christianity, I will always say I had two really good pastors, right? In my life as a evangelical.
Mm,
There were two pastors who I have the utmost respect for. I don't would never say a bad word about them. All right. And that is because they lived the life that they were speaking about. All right. Now, both of these pastors had very small congregations, right?
mm-hmm,
I mean, these were small groups, all right? And now, years later, I think maybe that's why they had small groups because they were not trying to manipulate people at all. You know, they were
right.
actually doing things in the community that was real, you know. I mean, one guy, he passed away, and I don't believe anything he believed, obviously. But at the time, I knew him and he would go into the community and he played basketball with, really down and out communities.
Mm,
And he would hold events where he would feed these people and he would give things away for absolutely for free. There was no, you gotta do as I say, then you get something for free.
mm-hmm.
It was like he was
Oh,
serving the community of humanity that he lived in.
right,
And I always admired that. And I still do. Like I would never say anything bad about his ministry, even though I don't believe anything he believed anymore. Right. And
right.
it was another pastor like that I had in New York that I thought was like that, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But they're such small ministries, all right. And when you look at the big ministries, they seem to be corrupt, you know.
Yep.
It's like they seem to be not like that at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering. Sometimes I wonder: do Christians really want the real deal, or do they just want to be entertained?
Yeah. I think it is a form of entertainment myself because there's a lot of fear involved and, emotional hangups. And I understand that. Um, but yeah, to a great deal, it's got to be ceremonial. It's got to be filled with music and, flashy lights and emotionalism from the pastor when he preaches. At least the best churches do. I wouldn't go to a church unless it really had all that, man. I need my, I need,
Do you ever
yeah.
do you ever go to church?
I haven't been in a while, man. I haven't
Because
been
I
in a
go
long
once in a
time.
while.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was thinking about going, but I never get around to waking up in time to do it.
I
but
go once in a while with my girlfriend
oh, okay.
because she'll not that she's really, religious, but she is Christian.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and once in a while she'll be like, oh, I want to go over to this church. It's a mega church. All
Mm,
right. And the music is great.
mm.
And it's really a good place to go if you just want to sit for an hour and be entertained.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, of
But once in a
course.
while, I'll say, all right, yeah, let's go. Even
And
though
look, you
she
can
knows
meet
I
some
don't
cool.
believe a word that they're saying.
That's not important. I mean, they're most of the people there probably don't really believe most of that stuff. I mean, depending on where you live. Like if you live in a town like I live in, probably everybody believes in it like 100%. Um, but if you live in like a bigger town, a big city, most people are kind of more culturally open-minded. Like, I lived in LA and lived in bigger cities all my life. And so I noticed the difference. And a lot of people, they go to church just to go for the community, the business, because you got a lot of business people there that you do business with. And you can meet them there for that, or you're there with friends, family. It's just tradition, activities for the kids, keep the kids out of trouble. There's like a whole lot of reasons. Help the poor, um, or just be entertained. I like the music. I like, I like this church because I like the pastor and I like the music and it's really fun. I feel at home here, and that's what a lot of people go to church for. Now, if you're in, and it's easy to conflate those people with the real serious Christians, like the real seekers, and the real seekers, what I've come to realize is that those are the ones that turn into atheists the fastest. Because,
I think
yeah,
I think you might be right about that.
yes, in my experience, it's really those fundamentalist type of guys that end up, because really for them, everything's got to be 100% true. Everything. Like nothing can be allegory, nothing can be, liberally looked at or read in a liberal slant. Everything's got to be strict, um, literal, you know. So all it takes, though, the weakness with that is that all it takes is one little hair, and the whole house of cards comes crumbling down. If one
Yes.
thing fails in your mind, if you see one little inconsistency in your view, the whole thing's going to come tumbling down. It's inevitable, because
Yeah.
otherwise you're going to have to become a liberal Christian, which is someone who really doesn't care one way or the other.
Yes.
Those
Yes.
kind of people don't really care. Like, oh, I believe it. I don't care. I understand. It probably doesn't make sense, but who gives a shit? Those kind of people. Not the fundies. The fundies are, they hate the liberals. They hate the people that don't give a shit type. They think you should be serious, and they really devote their life to it. Sacrifice their money, energy into it. And those people turn out to be, if they do leave the church, they'll usually end up to be non-religious. Period.
I think I fall into that category, really.
Yeah.
I mean, because I took it serious. I don't, not all the years I was a Christian, but there were years that I took it really serious,
Mm-hmm.
and I would look at the more progressive type Christians and really didn't think they were saved, you
Oh
know.
yeah. I
It's
used to
like,
call them. I used to call them weak-kneed flag-waving Christians.
you
I
know,
used to call them the. You guys are the fake ones. You guys are the phony weak-kneed flag wavers. You know, when
yeah,
you're ready to step up and do the real thing and really put on Christ clothing, come see me. Until then, you're just a fake flag waving phony that wants to be seen as a Christian, but
yeah.
in real life, you're just as bad as the atheist.
See, that's the two pastors that I said I really respect.
Mm-hmm.
They were real devout Christians,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew them personally. It wasn't like a show that I would go and just see them on a stage. You know what I mean? I knew
Yeah,
them in real life.
in real life. Yeah.
And they lived the life, and that's why I think to this day I think I had two great pastors. Even though I totally went atheist, but
Mm-hmm.
I respect the work that they do. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're really at the heart of it is people. It's not their church.
Mm-hmm.
They're not trying to build their kingdom.
Right.
They're not trying to
Right.
build their reputation. All
Right.
right. These are people that were exhibiting the humility, you know, didn't matter if you were Christian or not Christian. If they see you had a need, they'd want to meet it, and
Right. You
and
you
that's
know,
rare. It's rare.
Oh, very, very, because we live in a world that's so materialistic, and that really influences the church. And the thing about that is, how Jesus would often say, you know, although you're a part of the world, you are no part of the world, or although you are in the world, you are no part of the world. And he would also say that, if you want to be perfect like my Father in heaven is perfect, give up all your belongings and follow me.
Right.
It was totally different. Like your reward was never here on the earth. It was always in that afterlife, hope,
Always.
you know. And so,
Always.
right. And so they
And that's
never,
why I don't get that whole American thing going on.
because the whole situation changed. It's like, in the first century, you think about the history of Christianity. Christians were just Jewish people. They went to the synagogue every Saturday in ancient Israel, who were being ruled over by the Romans, and they had lost their land, and they had, corrupt leaders like King Herod, who was a little rich guy that was getting paid from the Roman government to keep quiet and do what he was told. So there's a lot of corruption. No one respected that. And then the church leaders like the Sadducees were people who got their little scraps from the table of Herod and everybody else. They were just got what they could get just to eke by because they had the temple and they were doing service in the temple. And then you had all these different groups of Jews, like the Pharisees and the enlightened ones. What were they called? The Essenes. And you had all these little Jewish groups. All of them were operating in a very, forget about third world country. This was like a fifth world country. This was like a country they didn't have running water hardly. They had to go to a well outside of the city to get water and stuff like that. And there's a lot of poverty and a lot of disabled people in the street, a lot of cripples, a lot of hunger, and a lot of crime. A lot of people being mugged and killed. And then you had a lot of terrorists who were so mad about that situation, and they were always rebelling against Rome and being hung up on crosses. And think about that. Just try to picture that, living in a town like that, living in a little town like that, or city or outskirts. That's horrible. That's a rough life. That's a very rough life. So when you create some sort of religion, or you come up, you have some figure like some, Jesus walking around talking about, and there are plenty of them, and they were all talking about how they're going to overthrow this world and bring a new world order, somehow. And most of them were just seditionists and terrorists saying that. And then you had some people like Jesus who were like these messiahs, and of course they weren't trying to enrich themselves, because who were they going to enrich themselves from? These little fishermen and, people that were eking by, these carpenters and, people that made wine and, people that lived off the land, pretty much farmers and stuff. I mean, they couldn't really afford to give them anything. They were giving all their money to the temple, which was like very little of their resources. So everybody was poor, you know? And so I can just imagine, if you were a devout Christian back then, you were probably a devout Christian. You probably didn't put your hopes in this world at all. In fact, you probably couldn't wait to die, to get out of this hell and get into heaven as promised, right? But it's not
Right.
like that now. America's nothing like ancient Israel.
Nothing like it.
And so the people are not going to be like that. No one's going to be thinking in those terms. It's like, I think I saw an interview with an African Christian who lived in a very poor village and went through a lot of things, and her hope was in, Jesus and stuff like that. And then she would see videos about people over here at mega churches praying for things like new jobs and a new car, and, I pray that my daughter marries a great guy, and all of this stuff, and they're like, what kind of prayers are those? Like, we're praying that
Right.
we get water today. Like,
No,
you know what I'm
I
saying?
know. It's just so crazy.
Yeah. So you can see the corruption. It's just open for corruption here. It's like now we've got a populace of people who are making money and they're doing things, and now the church is just gone to a whole other level. It's no longer a group of you know maybe 100 men walking around a small town knocking on doors. Now we're talking about a huge business is bigger than AT&T, man.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. Like the Christianity that used to think was biblical, when I look at American Christianity, I don't see it. I see like almost the opposite, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
like even like the mixture with politics. It's so like opposite of what I used to think that Jesus was about, right? like, like, I mean, look at this thing going on in the Gaza, right?
mm,
You have Christians are pretty much, the ones that really back Trump, right? They really are the ones who get him elected. They're really, really strong behind this leader. All right. And in the Gaza, Trump announces he's gonna own the Gaza, right?
turn into a
Now,
resort. Yeah.
right now, yes, turn it into this, Riviera.
Las Vegas.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, it's like the Christians seem to be happy with that. And I
Mm,
don't get it because I'm watching TV and I'm seeing like little old ladies sitting in rubble, you know, and they're like, that's all they know, right? It's
yeah,
like this was once their house, and now it's
right.
just nothing. And it's like the Jesus that I used to think was biblical was the one who would say, hey, wait a second. We got to care for those people, you know? So
Yeah,
it's like twisted upside down to me. It's like,
yeah. And that's what I always say, like my belief is that, the nature of reality is just constant change, everything changes. Nothing really stays the same. And the faster we can get, used to that concept and really observe that and take it serious, the less we get attached to these beliefs and these people and these ideals, things like that, because they change constantly. Like, I was just watching something like Auschwitz, where they killed millions of Jewish people. And now, you can buy tickets and go there, for a vacation and go see Auschwitz. I've got my ticket. Like, if you'd have told them people back then, people would be paying tickets to come here soon.
yeah,
They wouldn't believe you. They'd be like, why would they want to do that? It's because things change. The whole geography, the geopolitical situation, it's ever changing and evolving, and the people change right along with it. And people are just caught up in the moment, in today's, flavor of the month, so to speak. And they don't really realize that tomorrow things are going to be different. Things are always going to be different. And so don't get too attached to the here and now. That's why a lot of you have always have these rifts about the new generation and the older generation. The older generation never understands the newer generation because they're different. They're coming with a different way of thinking, a different way of looking at the world, and a whole other paradigm. And we old guys are like, man, these young people are stupid, aren't they? They're they're lazy, they're unvirtuous dogs, as far as we're concerned. I mean, I work in the IT field, so I have to work with a lot of young people and old people, right? And always us older guys, we're always talking shit about the young guys coming in
yeah,
because their whole ethic is different, their whole approach to the job is different. I love them to death. Don't get me wrong, but
yeah.
we do that. We joke all the time like that. But there's some sort of truth at the kernel of these jokes. that there's some kind of obvious difference there. And that's because us old guys, we get attached to the way things used to be and the way things we think they ought to be because they've always been done that way. And my dad and my granddad taught me this, that, and the other thing. And we identify with those things. And that's where the pain and suffering comes in when you start identifying with things that are going to change. You know, you're never going to reach that paradise, man. You're never going to get there because even if you did, it's never going to last forever. It's going to turn into something else, you know. So why pursue it? Why put yourself through that? Just be at peace, you know. Flow. Be like Bruce Lee said, man, be like the water.
I love that quote.
Yeah.
The water.
Yeah, be like the
Yes.
water, man.
Yeah. Well, Bruce Lee was a pretty cool guy. I liked him. You know.
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah. He you know, people that advance in life and evolve as humans are the kind of people that are very super disciplined. They're people that have gone through a lot of pain and discomfort and have excelled through it and transcended through it. Imagine what these people have learned from that experience, not just book knowledge wise, but just from an intuitive standpoint. Just think how intelligent they are, just intuitively intelligent because they've done so much and they've accomplished so much through their discipline and I'm telling you, it starts by becoming unattached. You know, that principle of unattachment where, you know, Bruce Lee is someone who was never comfortable in his comfort zone. He was like, I can be comfort here all day long. My mind is set up to just always push me to that comfort, but I need to fight like hell to get out of this comfort zone. Otherwise, I'm going to go stagnant. I'm never going to get better at my art. I'm going to have to really push myself to the level, to the edge, you know, and he has to force that change on himself, you know. And those are the people, man, they have a lot to tell us, man. They really do. If you look at people like that, people that like martial artists and people that do these extreme things and come out on the other side, man, they've got a story to tell, I tell you.
So, Scott, were you ever a Christian, or just you were always at the time Jehovah Witness, or did you ever dabble in other types of Christianity?
Yeah, so before I became a Jehovah Witness, I was, you know, familiar with like different things like Catholicism and mainly Southern Baptist because my grandma raised us to be Southern Baptists. And so I used to have to go to church and I never really took it serious. But then when I started becoming a little bit curious about religion, you know, I started forming ideas like that around, I guess, 19, 20 years old. And so I started picking up the Bible and listening to TV shows, like listening to these preachers on Sunday on the TV. And I was trying to learn something from them. And then Jehovah's Witnesses just happened to come by my, because they're on everybody's doorstep. So I let them in. I was ready. I was primed up to hear what they had to say. But then after I left them, let me back up. In the process of being a Jehovah Witness, I probably learned more about the church, the different religions than ever before, even from my own study, because I was forced to actually confront them and listen to their arguments and debate with them one on one and really become familiar with the argumentation in the ideas. Like back then, I didn't even know what the Trinity was. Like I was very interested in being a Christian, but what is this Trinity thing? I didn't understand it. I knew there was God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, but that they just seemed like different kinds. Like I guess the Holy Ghost is the power of God, and Jesus was the Son, and now he sits at the right hand side of God. So they're different people, but they're all different characters in this story I'm reading. But I come to find out that, you know, through Christian history, that they actually became the Trinity, one God or whatever. So there's a lot of things I didn't know, but I learned so much. I learned about the Trinity, its history. You know, I learned about how did why is December 25th the mark day for Jesus' birth? Why is Easter, the celebration for the resurrection, and all of these things, I learned so much back then. And then after I left, I kind of was such a fundamentalist that I became an atheist because, like we were just talking about, once one card falls, the whole deck of cards comes crashing down. And I already knew that the other churches are obviously wrong because I know where the Trinity comes from. I know where the idea of an immortal soul comes from. I know where the idea of hell comes from. These are pagan beliefs. I'm not a pagan. And so, yeah, when Jehovah's Witnesses were wrong, and I even said back then, look, if this religion is wrong, no religion is right. That was my thing.
Yes. There's one thing I got to ask you
Yeah.
because I hope you respect. I just talk, straight off the cuff,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm talking to you just like we're in the same room.
Sure.
But you're a smart man, okay? And the
I don't know
one
about that.
thing, well, the one thing like, I encountered Jehovah's Witnesses really young. You know, I remember getting the Watchtower and the books handed to you. I don't know, Reasoning from the Scriptures, I
Hmm.
think was one of them. The little red book,
Yeah, the Paradise book.
you know. And the thing is that I seemed to think at the time that these were very written for like really young people or like
Hmm.
not too educated people,
Yep.
like really simplistic.
They used to not always be like that. What happened? That was a marketing decision. Because if you look back at the literature, back before, say, the 70s, it used to be very extensive and exhaustive. It used to be like very scholastic. And so there was a whole lot of information to read through, and they really weren't picking up a lot of followers that way because most people are very simple minded, especially, back then, people, when you talked about God and concepts like that, the more basic the idea, the better. Don't confuse them with a whole lot of crap. So they just wanted to make books to be a little more step by step, like made for a kid, and then they always said, Jesus even said, you know, you must become a fool to become wise. You must be like, you know, a child, become a childlike before you understand these truths. And in the end of the day, they were like, yeah, well, these truths are pretty simple anyways. They don't really need to be that exhaustive. Why are we doing that anyways? So they decided, yeah, let's go ahead and make these books like kid books and let's see what happens. And it worked. That's when the influx started. That's when everybody really started getting with it because it was easy to follow, easy to understand. And, you know, and smart guys like the elders and people like that, they were in there. They understood it was stupid books, but they were like, but we're doing this for a reason. We all understand. You know?
you know
So
you probably old enough to remember the Chick Tracks, the
chick
um the,
tracks.
the little
Yeah, 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 yeah.
cartoons, like
Yeah.
a little comic book
Yep.
that Christians would hand out,
Yep.
and they were literally like, I guess for like a third grader or something.
Yeah.
But it would explain, the gospel.
I work at a
And
Catholic hospital and I saw one of those in the bathroom the other day. So funny. The little
they're like really
comic
like,
books.
yeah, like comic books for Jesus, right?
Hmm. And that's what I it's so funny. That's what I've come to term fundamentalist Christianity is kind of like comic book spirituality. It's kind of like you need this superhero guy and they can fly and can do all these amazing powers like Superman. Like it's like a comic book and and it works in today's society. It's so weird how this stuff works because when I was really looking at um, some of the history of how ancient people really used to convey information is they used to do it through storytelling. and their storytelling used to be analogous, so it would never really be literal. Like, there's even an old Buddhist story that teaches you how to not use people or be you. Yeah, how to not be used. I was actually going through that the other day, and it's a story about a tree that sits on a stream, and the tree is fed the water from the stream, right? Naturally. Well, one day the stream decided he's going to dry up for some reason, and he's going to move to another location. So the tree says to the river, but where am I going to get the water from? Because I'm over here feeding all these people. I'm feeding these animals that are using my leaves. And eventually the tree, basically the moral of the story was, look, I'm a fucking stream. I got to do what the fuck I got to do. Go fuck yourself. And he left, dried up, and the tree was just there and withered to death. But the moral of the story was, you have to do what you have to do to serve a greater purpose sometimes, and whatever. But that wasn't a literal story. No one really believed a tree spoke to a stream, and any of this conversation really historically happened, right? This is just how ancient people communicated ideas, right?
Right.
But see, these stories were handed down. Now we live in the day of Marvel superheroes and Superman and vampires and Dracula and Frankenstein and all these kind of things. Our whole outlook of reading things are different, and so we take things very literal. And then now even the discussion about its truth value comes into question, because then you're actually going to criticize it also from that paradigm. You're going to say, hey, the Bible's not true because, hey, there was no talking snake in the garden. You've got to be a fool. This is obviously not real. This isn't true. It could have been that the ancient people didn't really mean it to be taken that way. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
the tree and the stream thing. Like, you're, you can't just say, well, Buddhism is false because we know that trees and streams don't talk to each other. Like, that's not the point. Like, you're off the point. You know what I mean? But a
Yeah,
lot of that is, unfortunately, a lot of that is promoted by the believers themselves. They believe it's literal. They believe in
I
this
know.
comic book. They believe in the comic book story,
I know.
and
And I
they
don't,
miss
that's
the
one of the
point.
things I don't get. Like, I talk to Christians now a lot online, and like the book of Job. I mean,
Yeah,
I see that
perfect example.
completely as fictitious, a mythological story. And yes, you could take meaning out of it and learn something from it,
Yeah,
but
of
they take
course.
it literally.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly. Like, Jonah, the story of Jonah. The guy gets stuck in the whale for 3 days or whatever. Like, the point of the story was, reality is going to check you. You had a purpose that you felt good to promote, which was to warn Nineveh about their problems, and you were there. You were compelled in your mind to do it. You went there to do it, but then you thought, you know what? Screw these people. I'm scared. And reality, pretty much, you let the world defeat you. And that could be the moral of that story, was that, you let the world eat you up, man. You didn't stand up for your values. You didn't stand up for a greater principle. Um, you know what I'm saying?
well,
It could be. I'm not saying that is, but there's just so many ways you can take these stories rather than literal. Seems like the literal thing is the more weird thing.
but when a Christian goes the more allegorical way of thinking, let's take like the book of Job. They're very much criticized by the fundamentalist, right? The fundamentalist comes after them and says, "No, do you? It's totally literal," you know. And
Right.
it's like, I mean, stuff like that, I can't even like wrap my head around. Like, why somebody would take literally that there is this all-powerful transcendent being who kind of makes a bet with Satan, right?
Yeah.
And wants to, lets the Satan do all these rotten things to a man, right?
Hmm.
and the whole thing is like so obviously not to be taken literal in my way of reading.
Yeah, of course. I mean, where Satan was at the time, it was like a courtyard. It was like a, you had Satan there, you had Yahweh there, you had the council, and they're all set. It kind of puts you in the mind of Olympia, with the Greek gods who all sit around and judge how they're gonna deal with the humans as their little pawns in the game.
Yeah, it's
And so it's kind of the same sort of story. It's just a very Jewish maybe rendition of that. You know,
yeah. I mean, would you agree that it's obviously fictitious or mythological?
of course,
Even if you could learn something from it,
yeah,
right? It's still obviously mythology. Mythology. And yet
right,
there's so many people that will argue and argue and argue that no is exactly what happened, you know.
exactly. And and unfortunately too, that goes back into the power structures like you were talking about. The church, the church has a doctrine, and maybe part of that doctrine is to take that stuff literal. And so they've allowed the church to maybe just from the time they were raised to understand that these things are literal. Snakes can talk now, at least when God wants them to. Donkeys can talk. People can, raise other people from the dead. These things really happen. And, it's part of the mythology. It's like Rome, Rome, the Roman, and this is why you hear a lot of people like, a lot of these Bible scholars that do all that historical work talk about how the Christian narrative sort of borrowed some of its literary structure from Greeks, from the Greek and Romans. Even was it Romulus? Romulus was a Greek god, the founder of Rome.
Yeah.
Romulus, and he died, was resurrected 3 days later, ascended to heaven, born of a virgin. All of these kind of things, and so they sort of borrow those literary tools, and put it in their stories, and it's like if you understood. Now, I'm not sure if ancient Israelites really understood Roman mythology or not, but somebody did because somebody copied that story. Yeah, that's what it looks like to me. It looks like someone copied a lot of stuff from a lot of different cultures and put it all together to create this Jesus narrative. And
That makes sense to me because that's just what people do, right? In cultures. We borrow from things that we learned in the past. That's how we operate. You
right,
know, your mother told you a story, and oh, I always remember that, and you could pass it on even if you don't use you could put different characters in the place but tell the same story, you know.
right, right.
And I think that's a lot of what went on, with these ancient writings.
Of course. And
You
and,
know,
and don't get me wrong. I believe that these folks did believe in a literal God. I believe they believed in Yahweh 100%, because when they went to war, they actually prayed that they would be delivered from their enemies.
yeah,
So I do believe they believe, just like today, people believe in God. They believe that's a reality. That's somebody who, but it's just that back then, from what a lot of scholars tell us, that just their literary style was such that they would tell stories in that way. But yeah, I think they believed in God. I think they believed the stories were true, maybe not literally true, but they believed that the overall import of the story was true, and it provided a great guide. Kind of like how a grandmother will say, "Well, remember what happened to Little Red Riding Hood?" Like it's just to teach you a moral. It's a
that's what I'm
moral
saying.
story.
It was
Yeah,
to teach something important, you know. And that's the thing is like after leaving Christianity, I'm trying to make sense of what the Bible really is, and what it was meant to be. And I think in order to do that, even if you're a Christian, I think you should be fair and go back and try to understand what were the people at that time. What kind of people were they? How did they normally communicate with one another? All right, because without that, 2,000 years later, you're left, understanding something from a totally different perspective
Mm-hmm.
than what the original writing was meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like if I write something and someone reading about it today versus someone reading about it 2,000 years from now, they're going to have a hard time figuring out what I was talking about.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Because they weren't in my time era, you know?
Yeah. Back then, history wasn't. People didn't do history in the same way. There was no such thing as science back then in the way we understand it. Things were different. People were different, and that's what happens. Things change. People change, and so cultures and societies we all change, and so we can't really. There's a fallacy that's called presentism. It's when we judge a culture or people from another time period by today's standards. Like it's like today you may be wearing clothes and you may be wearing a hat and I'm wearing a pink shirt. Well, maybe 2,000 years from now, such a thing would be looked at as ridiculous. Like,
Right.
why would he wear a pink shirt? And why would he wear this thing on his head? That's ridiculous, to them. And they would say, so I guess they were crazy people. I guess those two guys were weirdos or whatever. But that wouldn't be true. We were just normal people living in a normal time. It's just that they would be judging us from their cultural, perspective. And so
Exactly.
we can do the same thing against people in the Bible. We can look at a lot of things as crazy or silly or like, I've had a lot of debates on slavery, for example. Now that's a little tricky because we're talking about God here. So, but the practice of slavery, you got to understand, was just a normal thing up until relatively recently, right? Like
Yeah.
no one even thought that it was an immoral thing to do. No one even considered it bad, until recently. So when you go back and you say, "Oh, the Bible's evil," those people were evil that wrote the Bible because they had slaves. Well, not necessarily. They were just kind of fitting into their normal culture at the time. Now, you can question, well, God's different because God is supposed to be the way they define it as this unchanging,
Yes.
all knowing. He's not living in the present. He's omnipresent. He's everywhere and every time.
Right.
So he knows what's right and wrong. So you can make arguments on that. You can kind of have problems on that. But judging a culture is a little different.
See, when I talk about slavery in the Bible, I'm not talking about the people who were doing slavery because that
Right.
was their culture.
Right.
And I mean, I still think it was wrong,
Right.
but it wasn't
Right.
wrong to them,
Right.
at that
Right.
time. All
Right.
right. But what I argue is it's God who was bending to the culture.
Right.
And
There
that
you go.
doesn't make sense to me.
Exactly.
It's like,
Exactly.
he didn't have to endorse this behavior.
Yeah,
And
and that's where the confusion comes in when we have these sort of discussions with Christians because sometimes that gets lost. Like we're not really talking about the people and the culture. Like we understand it's a document written in a particular culture, and we're fine with that. What we do have a question about is why would a God bend the knee to these ancient cultures? It's almost like you're saying that, well, they're ancient cultures. There was no other solution to get things done but slavery. So God
Yeah.
had to allow it. But, that's kind of like saying, well, you can't stop murder either because people kept murdering. People kept doing that. But God was still made laws against murder, or laws against eating shellfish, or laws against wearing wool clothes or tattoos and a host of other arbitrary things, right?
Yeah.
Why wasn't slavery included?
No,
It's like a
I know.
consistency issue.
And it's also, we have a book, the Bible, which is thousands of years old. And that was like the final revelation of God, right? Now some people think God is talking to them, today, right now.
Hmm.
But ultimately, we don't, as a society, take that all too seriously, actually, right? We look at, Christianity as being Bible based, right?
Right, right.
So the thing is that today's culture is so much different, and yet the Christians apply the Bible, which was written thousands of years ago, to today's culture, which we're not really sure if God might have actually changed with time as well, because we don't
Hmm.
know that. We just know that, there was a book 2,000 years ago, you know, and this is issues like you would see today, like trans and gay
Hmm.
rights and
Hmm.
abortion and the cultural issues of today.
Right.
And yet Christians will be dogmatic,
Hmm.
and say, well, look, God doesn't bend to the culture,
Right,
you know.
right,
And
right.
yet we look at slavery and he
Make an
did
excuse. Yeah.
bend to the culture.
Hmm. That's the problem. That's my issue, the consistency issue. Um, so that's why I say I think that they believed in God, and they used God to justify everything they did. And the Israelites were a very transactional culture, and so it was no wonder that their escape out of the whole sin issue was going to be a transaction. Life for life. As they say, tooth for tooth, eye for eye. So life for life, and so they need a perfect life to atone for the sins of Adam. That's why the Apostle Paul called him the greater Adam. And this kind of gets into another change we can talk about. Like, even back then, all of these things like the Pauline church came after Jesus, right, died. But the Pauline church was totally different than the Jerusalem church, because the Pauline church became sort of like appealing to the Greeks and the Gnostics and the pagans. And so he used their language and used their concepts, like, you know, being resurrected. You're not going to have this same body. You're going to, kind of like the idea of a soul or spirit going to heaven. Um, Jesus was resurrected spiritually. He appeared to me in a vision, in a light and stuff like that. All of this was very pagan, and very Greek and Roman, a lot of these concepts. And his church won out, man. The Jerusalem church was like, no, you got to be circumcised and you got to follow the Jewish laws, and you've got to, you pretty much got to be a Jewish person. Just believe that Jesus was the Messiah. That's the only difference, But Paul took it further, man, and he was a genius for that. He went and got a lot of converts that way by talking their, even changed his name from Saul to Paul, you know, just to become, like he said, you must become all things to all people. So he was willing to bend the knee to the other culture, and he felt like God was directing him to do that work. And so there's a history of God bending the knee and changing, and I know a lot of Christians will hate to hear that,
Right.
but I think that that's just history. And I think that most of, or a good deal of, the Pauline letters are forgeries. They were written by the followers of Paul and his cult after he died, like
Right.
Timothy and a host of other Titus, all these other letters weren't really attributed to Paul at all. So
Now,
changed.
all that makes sense to me from like a non-believer mindset. Like that makes sense to me that, people people changed and they adapted beliefs as they went along. All right. That to me is just people evolving, thoughts evolving. All right. And we see religion evolving. Maybe slow, but we do see it. I
Yep.
mean, even like the Protestant Reformation. I mean, a big thing, right? But you could say there was an evolution there. There
Right.
was a shift from one way of thinking to another. So the dogmatic part of Christianity is most bothersome to me. You know, it's
It's just
like,
so ironic, it's like what the apostle Paul did was he sort of went against the establishment, which the establishment was the Jerusalem church, which were supported by, the people. And then, what Paul did is he went out and he self-appointed himself as an apostle, which I'm pretty sure that was a big problem. Like, who the hell is this guy to make himself an apostle? Like, I don't even know this dude. Now he's an apostle because he had a vision or something. Yeah, right. Get the fuck out of here. But no, he did it and he ran with it and he had confidence and he said, you know what? I can be an apostle too, God damn it. And I'm going to go out here and I'm going to get followers and I'm going to appeal to more people. I'm going to go to the Greeks and go to the pantheist people. He even cited in one of his scriptures a poem by some pantheist poet in one of his sermons. And so he was very willing to go in and sort of tweak his message out to fit the cultures that he was talking
yeah,
to. And, the Catholic Church had followed suit with that. That's why you see the Pope with all these idols, so-called idols in his in the Vatican. He's inclusive. That is Christianity's superpower. They're very inclusive. They change and evolve. If you look at Islam, Islam is very strict. They don't allow too much. Same with the Jewish people. It's very exclusive.
yeah,
But Christianity is a conversion type of religion. So
yes,
for it to really work, it has to be willing to compromise with a lot of cultures and a lot of people and make it work. And it's worked, man. That's why they're number one. Number one, they won. The Christians won. We have
yeah,
a whole calendar. I mean, think about it. It's what 2025 from the date of who?
yeah. And the thing is that like you're referring, or at least part of what you were saying reminds me of when Paul was teaching, and he was saying, "I see that you have this shrine to the unknown God.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and today I'm here to reveal to you,
Who he is? Yeah.
who he is." That
Right.
was an appeal, like to that culture,
Yep.
right? He was
Yep.
going in
And
and
they loved.
saying,
They ate it up. They ate it up, man. They loved
"Yeah,
it. They love it
yeah,
till today. When missionaries go into tribes of Africa or go to their tribes in South America and they look at their idols, they say the same thing. Look, I'll show you who the God is behind that, and they love it. They're like, that gives them so much joy, in pride. It's like, oh wow, you mean there's really a God behind this? Yeah, yeah, you're actually worshiping the true God. Did you know that? Wow. So then they're more than willing to do what they have to do to be part of it. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah."
It's kind of screwed up if you think about
It's
it.
it's just the human mind and how it works. I
Yeah.
mean, and there is something in the human mind that is always seeking, right? You always People are seeking out after some deeper meaning, something bigger than themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where religion, puts itself. It's
Yeah,
like
man.
they offer answers to people, right?
Yes.
They say, "Oh no, all the things you were contemplating. Well, I have an answer here," you know, and
Yeah,
and the
and
answer is always their version of a god, right? It's always the
right.
answer.
And it's it's been going on well before Christianity. Like you could say that Christianity borrowed from other religions. They borrowed from Judaism. They borrowed from Greek gods and stories, and even morals. Morality. Um, when you think about the Ten Commandments, in Judaism, right? Well, you had the Code of Hammurabi that predated
Right.
that stuff by thousands of years, hundreds of years at least, from another culture, and in many ways it was more progressive than the Jewish version of that. But they all kind of entailed the same sort of laws. Love your God. Love your neighbor as yourself. This and that. And then they had slavery laws. And the Code of Hammurabi was arguably a little more humane than the Jewish, but obviously the American slavery was not as humane as the Jewish laws governing slavery, at least we're told. But when I looked into it, actually, um, we had similar restrictions and constraints on slavery in this country too. It's just that no one really cared. So they beat their
Yeah,
slaves to
I
death.
I looked into that at one time as well, and in America there were laws on how you had to treat your slave.
Hmm.
Like if you were to kill your slave in the American slavery period, that was a crime, and it
Right.
was a crime punishable by death. You
Hmm.
could die. You could be put to death if you were found to have purposely killed your slave,
Right. Right.
right? So it wasn't where the slave owner was allowed to do anything. There
Right.
was some laws behind it that were a guidance or a regulation of the practice.
Right.
You know, it still existed as there was, and it was similar to the regulations back in biblical times, as far as I understand.
Hmm. Oh
There were
yeah.
similar
Oh yeah.
regulations.
Very similar, and that's really that that doesn't help like the Christian slavery apologists view, because a lot of the Christian apologists um, will tell you, yeah, but we know that the slavery, the way God regulated it in the Old Testament, was divine, because
Right.
the way we did it was a lot more barbaric and we didn't follow. So that was like a touch. You could see the divine touch of God in the
Right.
slavery laws back then. But as you look deeper into it, no, if you put the laws side by side, they're very comparative. It's
Yeah.
just that maybe we only hear about the really abusive stuff from movies like Roots and
Yeah.
some of
And
the.
there's we've come to a point in our culture where slavery is, considered an evil. I mean, you very rarely talk to someone who would consider slavery not an evil. All right. Although I have spoke to some Christians who would say, well, no, it's not always evil. It's sometimes okay. And they're using the Bible to say that. I mean, that
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Because almost everyone would agree that slavery is bad, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah,
And the only
exactly.
people I've encountered that honestly that would argue otherwise have been Christians,
Hmm.
and maybe there's other religious people that would also argue that it's not always bad. You know, I don't talk to many Muslims, or religious Jews, but it amazes me when Christians like support institutional slavery as long as it was kind. Just, it's like,
Hmm.
I mean, that apologetic makes me sick to my stomach.
And then they'll always say, "Well, wasn't it the Christian abolitionists who,
Right,
you know?"
right.
But the thing is, why did it take that long for the abolitionists to come along? I mean, why did Jesus say, "Serve your masters as you serve the Lord"? Why didn't he say, "No, get rid of slavery. It's wrong"? There should have been abolitionists way back when Jesus walked the earth, namely Jesus, first of all, in my opinion. If it's so wrong, and I think everybody agrees slavery is wrong, even the Christians that argue for it say it's wrong. Because I mean, it's got to be. Think about it. Why would God want to free his people from Egypt if it was a good thing? It's like it was a bad thing, and it was something you did to your enemies. And God would command that, like you can buy and sell your slaves from the nations around you, and you can will their children down, to your children, as an inheritance for time indefinite. So it was an evil practice that was done against your enemies. So you had to look at your enemy as less than human. That's the only way
Yes,
I could see justifying anything like that.
yes, and I could understand the culture being that way. What I can't get over is that the God was that way.
Right.
That's the thing. I mean, I can understand these people who didn't know any better,
Hmm.
and that's the way they were, doing their society,
Yeah.
right? But I can't get over God saying you may take slaves from the lands around you,
Right.
and you may own them
Right.
as property, and you may pass them along to your future generations.
Yeah.
I can't get past that.
Right.
Okay?
It's.
And it's not, and that's because it was Jehovah speaking.
Hmm.
It wasn't the people. It was like,
Right.
you know,
This was what they were told by their God.
yes,
Jehovah commands them. And he
yeah,
got
and then
mad at Saul when he didn't kill all the infants and the women and all the animals. He spared like some kids and some animals, and God got mad with him and regretted that he made him the king. So it's like he commanded some really
right,
child murder, like genocide. He wanted the entire land to be destroyed.
right, and the God of the Bible, Old Testament at least, was not wimpy.
No.
See? So it's like, why was he so wimpy with slavery? It's
Right.
like, well, okay, you could do this.
In fact, I got a few things I'd like to add to that. Beat them. Just don't beat them too much.
Exactly. It's like it. I'm sorry, but I can't even make any sense of that at all. I
Mm-mm.
just can't. And
No, no.
I
It's
mean, this
it's
is a God that would just destroy people. Right? And then when it comes to slavery, it's like, well, I'll just give you a little guidance. You kind of got to be kind while you own them. It's
right.
like, come on.
We know a presuppositionalist would ask you, well, who are you to judge? How do you know it's wrong if you
Oh
don't
yeah.
believe it? Where do you get your standards from? So that'll be that. I think that's another way around it.
I
They'll
know.
try
I,
to
I
use
was
that.
talking. I was talking to another presuppositionalist.
Oh
Real
no.
nice guy, nicer than other presuppositionalists I've encountered. So
Hmm.
he was a real nice guy. But after I got off and after I was thinking about it, I'm like, it is still completely arrogant. It's like, because what he was saying was there are no atheists.
Right.
it's like I know I'm an atheist. And
Right.
it's like you're arguing to me that there are no atheists because your presupposition tells you that there are no atheists.
Hmm.
And it's like, I know that you're wrong about that.
Yeah. You
I'm
know
saying to
firsthand.
myself. You
Yeah,
know,
you know yourself. You know what your beliefs are. You know,
exactly.
but there was, the funny thing is there was, and this kind of goes into theory of mind, but there was this surgeon. He was a neuroscientist and neurosurgeon, Ramachandran. Forget what his first name was, but he was a big atheist surgeon. But one of his experiments was a split brain patient, and the guy came in was an atheist, and they actually severed his brain to where they were both separate from each other. So there were like two personalities going on in his brain at the same time, right? Well, did you know that the right side of his brain was a Christian, was a theist? He believed in God, and his right side was still an atheist, right? And he was talking about all other things like motor functions, like his left side of his brain could see or could see something, but he couldn't really talk about it. So the right side of his brain would actually draw the picture of what he's seeing. And the guy's like, I don't see it, but I'm just drawing it. And it's like, because his eye, he was blind in one side, but he had this blind sight from that operation. But one side was an atheist, the other side was a theist. So he used to always ask, so which side is going to heaven? Which side is going to hell? But it
You
just
know,
lets you know, maybe could show you that maybe you kind of are a theist somewhere in there.
well,
You just don't know it.
I have thought that atheism and theism is similar to just two sides of a coin. I have
Yeah,
actually like thought of that. Not that it's a fact, but just like philosophically, I guess I've thought that. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Because you're capable of being either one, right?
right,
I mean, I
right.
know for myself, I was a theist and now I'm an atheist. So I'm definitely capable of being either one,
Mm,
you know.
absolutely.
So
Hey, Otangelo, how you doing, man? It's been a long time.
Yeah, a long time, Scott.
Yeah, years.
I think about 4 or 5 years, maybe.
Must be. Yeah, it's been a long time. I think Otangelo was on my channel one time a long time ago, and he came and called in. We had some discussions. Can't even remember. I think it was about intelligent design. I think we were talking about.
what I like about Artangelo is he seems like a regular guy.
Oh yeah,
I like
absolutely.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know. And Artangelo, I had comments on my post where you were on alive, and actually it was one of it was Sophie from Scott's discussion channel. Was it Sophia?
Yeah, Sophia.
She made a comment that she thought Otangelo was an awesome guy. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, he's a pretty good guy.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So Otangelo, may I ask you, as you are a Christian, correct?
Yes.
What do you do with what's going on in Christian circles with mega church abuse and pastors who are abusing people for decades, and the spiritual abuse that we're seeing in the news, right? Whether you're Christian or atheist or anything in between, we're seeing it in the news. Right? What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, the Bible says that there will be many leaders coming in heaven to Christ and say, well, Lord, we did do this. We did expel demons. We made big miracles. We prophesied in your name and so forth. And he will say, well, I never knew you. And that tells me that there will be many Christian leaders which preach the false gospel enriched in name of Christ and so forth, the prosperity gospel and prosperity preachers and so forth. And I believe many of those people, they are not saved.
I see that as being very valid, especially from a Christian perspective. and from my own perspective, but why I go one step further, like in my own thought process, and it's why do you think that so many people are led astray, are led down this road where they're following a man, all right, instead of God, right? They're following a man, and they're led so far astray that they cover up abuse just to preserve the man's ministry, or what they
Yes.
consider the ministry of God. All right. And it's it's a terrible stain on Christianity from an
Yes, it
outside
is.
perspective, you know.
Yes. Not only from an outside perspective, but also for me as a Christian. I mean, I feel ashamed by seeing. I mean, in my town, in my city, there are pastors which, um, one, for example, he has over 5,000 members. Several times I visited his church, and he had a mistress for a long time,
Yeah.
and he went to congresses to speech about the gospel. Instead, with his wife, he went with his mistress,
Right.
and
Right.
and and his son, um, he abused in during youth congregation, young girls, and it was in the news and so forth. And then he was um, he stayed away from the church, I think, for 6 months. He and his son, or something like that, and then he returned. And I think this is just absurd. And very recently, I knew that um, this is the Foursquare Church, which I think it is a congregation which also exists in the United States. So it came from the States to Brazil. And the leadership, they uncovered him because he was a great preacher and moneymaker. And he is still doing his job in the church. And I know that there are other denominations. Very recently, they voted in the church and they decided to separate themselves from Foursquare Church because there were other scandals of other pastors, and it's very sad, and it's a shame, and it's not only here and there, but it is quite common actually. Today there was a news that the pastor, he tried to rape a 13-year-old girl, and she tried to defend herself, and she beat him and he killed her. So
Mm.
Right.
I mean,
So you don't think.
it is really horrible. But the problem also is that many outsiders, they say, "Hey, look what the church is doing," but they are not making a distinction between what people do and what actually Christ said. He said, "Love your next as yourself." And if people are not following that who is to be blamed? The Lord, or who didn't follow him?
I I'm not blaming the Lord or Jesus for these things. Okay. So I don't look at all Christians as being in the same boat. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, there's some bad people that are running certain churches. Okay. What really messes with my mind is just when I think about how many people believe that bad guy. You know what I mean? Like, they seem really gullible to me that they would follow this bad guy, all the way and cover up for them. All right. And that just is it just messes with my mind, you know. Before
Yeah,
before you came on, I was talking to Scott. I had two pastors in my life when I was a Christian that I think were incredible men, and they lived the life that they talked about. All right. But it seems like they were more a rarity and their churches were small. And yet, when I look at these humongous, huge churches, uh, they just fall like one after another, where the men leading them turn out to be very corrupt men, and
Yeah, I wouldn't
this is like,
generalize. I also know mega churches where the founder was just absolutely an amazing guy, and he really served the Lord. He didn't do it because of money, and the church grew because he had just an absolutely fantastic ministry with hundreds of social care initiatives and so forth, really living the gospel and loving the next as yourself and being a leader. So you said correctly, you cannot generalize. We have bad examples as we have also very good examples, both in mega churches as also in small churches. So it is not something equal. It is very stochastically distributed, I'd say.
well, the church you go to, just curious, do you know the pastor?
I am actually not going to any church for a few years because
Oh, okay.
I've not found any church that I like, to be honest. Yeah.
Now, isn't like, I find that interesting because you seem like a sincere guy, and yet you're probably not finding a church that you say, wow, this is really where I belong at this moment, right? And
Yeah.
I find that interesting because, you would think that God would have a place for you, right? I mean, that God would have a place for you to go to have fellowship with other people that are like you, right? Or like-minded, right?
Well, I don't say they don't exist. I don't say that the problem is only in the outside. Maybe it's also something from me that um, I don't visit any churches currently. You know.
Are you like a loner type person? Like, do you like to be alone?
Uh, no, I wouldn't say that. I have a good social life. I have family, wife,
Yeah,
a girl. No, I wouldn't say that.
yeah. So you would probably prefer to find a church that you really could call home. It would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think I need really to find a church also because of my daughter. I think it's important that she can um, go to church and learn these things.
So I hope you find a place that fits that need. But I will also tell you, be careful because there's a lot
Yeah,
of there's a lot of crazy ministers out there. All right.
yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. But I have white. I don't have black hair anymore, so I think I have some experience.
See, I'm going to share something without mentioning any names, okay? Because I can't mention names. But I'm very, very familiar with some of the inner operations of one of the or I'm going to say one of the biggest churches in the United States, okay? And in that church, all right, there's definitely a gap between, or a wall between, the staff who run the church and the people who sit in the pews, the people who go to the church. And they're completely separate. Okay. And I think
Yeah,
that's terrible. Like, I think
yeah,
that in and of itself is wrong. All right. And the other thing is, in the church, there's a culture of a hierarchy where the leadership is run from the top down, and you either conform to leadership or you're gone. All
Right.
right. And that is what I have kind of leaning towards, why these churches become so corrupt, because there's so much power in the hands of the few and so little power in the hands of the majority. So it becomes kind of like a dictatorship, you know?
Yeah, or a
And
cult.
yeah, a cult, or yeah, I think they're a cult, but that type of thing seems to be prominent in at least some of the big churches that are falling, today. They seem to be run from the top down. There's a separation between who is on staff and who is not.
Yeah, I'll
I
be
mean,
honest with you. Like, I work in a Catholic hospital, and I was actually inquiring about some churches I was trying to go to here in town, and I wanted to find something that would fit me a lot better. You know what I mean? Like where I could actually interact and be myself, and you know. But the problem is a lot of people, other Christians warn me like, well, don't go to this church because they're kind of controlling, and you might not want to go here because the pastor's kind of weird and the pastor's wife and just different things. And so it seems like it is kind of a challenge. So I kind of understand where Otandelo's coming from. It's kind of hard to find something that's for you. You know what I mean? Because it would be nice to go somewhere where you can, congregate with folks and, share ideas and talk about God and stuff like that.
Just give me a minute, please.
And it's weird, and it's more prevalent these days than ever. I think my mom went to a church. Of course, she went to one I'd never go to. She went one of these holiness churches, where they fall out in church and get hit by the Holy Spirit and stuff,
mhm.
and that's a little too much for me. But and she was okay with it for a while, but she kind of had to get away from all that. But yeah, there's so much weird corruption that goes on these days, man.
Funny thing, Scott, I've been to churches like that in the past,
Hmm.
and it seemed like for me they would be okay for a little while, but when it's week in and week out and it's always mayhem going on, it gets a little too much after a while. you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like one of the guys in the chat said, just like the current culture. That's where we come from. They don't come from outer space.
The thing is with these churches, and again, I there's no way I can mention names, all right, but I have an inside look at it. Um, the church staff and employees and the ones who run it, they look at the people in the audience as just that, an audience. Okay?
Hmm.
They're not even like pretending otherwise. Okay.
Right.
It's not like they're saying, oh, it is literally known in that culture that that's the audience, and we're the ones doing the show on a stage
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
using a green room. I was
Right.
talking about that by myself before because it amazed me because I have a background, at least a little background in show business, and that's not me being an entertainer whatsoever. It's
Okay.
just being around entertainers. Right?
Gotcha.
And that's an entertainment word.
It's an
A green
entertainment
room
venue.
is is,
It's like
is
a
where
church is an
entertainers
entertainment venue.
go. All right.
Yeah.
And then they stay private, then they go put on their show, and then they go back to the green room. And these mega churches literally use that same terminology. It's like, the Sunday performance. All right. Now, I don't know if Christians would even believe me when I say that is what's going on. I don't know, but I know from the inside. Okay. And I'm not sharing any names and will not, but that
Right.
is what's going on.
Well, here's a little story. My sister, she's also not really a Christian, but she's a blues and jazz singer, and she gets hired by churches here to
Yeah.
go sing in the church, and they pay her $200 to perform. And now she knows the songs in and out, the hymns, everything. Um, but it doesn't. The church doesn't care that she's not a Christian or a member or something like that. So it's kind of like she was telling me, yeah, it's kind of like they're all sort of like that. Even me, to the pastor, to the people in the choir, everybody's kind of like hired hands or part of the show at least. Maybe they're not paid, but it's all just kind of a show and a script, which is kind of weird. But
Yes. And that's exactly my understanding from people I know on the inside. All right.
yeah,
And I just think that's wrong. Like
yeah.
if I was a Christian, I wouldn't want that. Right?
Mm.
I
What do you
mean,
think, Otangelo? Do you think that's kind of wrong, or what are your views on that? Like hiring secular people to perform at church?
I don't know if that is wrong. I've
Right.
never seen it actually, but I think if there are talented people in the church, they should be hired and engaged.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
well, I know on the staff, there's staff, and then there's musicians like you were referring to, Scott. And
Yeah.
on the musician side, it plays very little role whether they believe in God
Yeah.
or
Like
not.
right. Right. Right.
It's just they're paid to come in, play an instrument, and go home.
But you're
You
talking
know?
about staff people that play a real major role in like ministering to the people.
Yes, they work at the church and they work as part of the ministry.
Right.
And
You know what I have big problems with is that there are principally here in Brazil so many that were attracted by the prosperity gospel because these pastors they were making big promises to these people and telling that if they would have faith and so forth, that God would honor it. And if they pray hard enough, then God will give them a new car and a house and things and material things and
Mm.
so forth. And many were even giving their entire belongings to the church because they were also so insistently asking for the tithe, for give money to the church. And in many cases, these people they became poor and they didn't see the results of what the church was promising that God would do, and they simply distanced themselves from God and from the church because of disappointment, because their expectations were simply not attended. And that's terrible.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and
Yes.
I I think a lot of Christians can agree that that's terrible. You know,
Yeah.
of course I think it's terrible, but even when I was a Christian, I would have also thought that was terrible. I mean, I remember going to one church where it was a very working class area, and the pastor was passing around a offering plate and talking about people putting their gold jewelry in it.
Hmm.
It's like, come
It's not
on.
scriptural. It's not scriptural, number one, and
But
that's why
figuring
people.
that they might not have had money, all right, but they might have had that beautiful gold chain,
Yeah.
you know.
That's why I think it's important for people to, if you are a Christian, to understand what the Bible really teaches. That way you're protected against liars like that because Jesus taught no such thing. In fact, like we were talking about earlier, Lou, like it was complete opposite. Give away everything you own and follow me, is a complete opposite message. Um, and so people would do well to read their Bibles, or at least at the very minimal, just have some common sense. God isn't a genie in a box.
No,
Yeah.
and God certainly doesn't need money. All right. Now I could understand, people saying, well, you're not giving the money to God, you're giving it to a ministry. and you're giving it from your heart to God, right? That'd be how you might understand it. All right.
Right.
But the end result is the money goes to a person. you know,
Right.
you know what I
But
mean?
I mean, I am very objective about all these things, and I can pretty clearly see them and how they are negative and all. But it doesn't affect my faith at all.
Right. Well, it
And
shouldn't. Those
yeah, I
aren't
don't
good
think it should
reasons.
either.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Those aren't
I
good
don't think
reasons.
it should affect your faith because I think that if you have a real faith, that shouldn't affect it. You
Mm-mm.
know, if
Yeah,
your
and
faith
it
is
doesn't.
actually in Jesus, if that's your faith, it shouldn't affect you that the preacher is, a corrupt person trying to take people's money.
Yeah,
Even Jesus told you
exactly.
that was going to happen. Jesus
yeah,
warned about people like that. So
yeah,
if you really believe in Jesus, then you need to go by that, you know.
yeah,
But a lot of people they confuse the pastor and the church and everything with God Himself, and that's where a lot of these problems come in, you know.
yeah, and that's
Yeah,
that's where I wish Christians would like tell other Christians,
Oh, they
to
do,
put
they
their
do.
faith only in Jesus and not, these people, because it's these people's ministries which seem to grow the most.
Well, when
All right.
Christians don't, that's where me and you come in, Lou. We'll do it for them.
Yeah, but they would never believe an atheist though.
Yeah, I
Like I'm
know,
an
but
atheist. Christians don't want to hear what I have to say.
no,
But
they
a
won't want
guy
to
like
hear it.
Angelo, they would hear what you have to say.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it's yeah, it's a sad state of affair, and it again, it's because people premise their faith on, I think peer pressure. The wrong things. They go to church because, they have church family there. They have a lot of things going on socially. It's kind of like a social convention. And so they don't really, and that's the good thing I can say about the fundamentalists. They take it serious enough to where they're not going to let you just get away with anything. They're watching, and they're looking for consistency, and they will leave that church and go find another one that does stand up for the. They're not going to fall for these weak-kneed, flag-waving, phony Christians out there. They're going to go for the real deal Christian. And but that's because they actually read the Bible. They actually put the time in, the study in, and things like that. But a lot of people, like, I was saying the other day, like, we were having that debate with that guy. Was it we were talking about the ontological argument, the moral argument, the theological argument, all of these fine tuning, all of these arguments, right? Well, the thing is, the little old lady down at the church doesn't care about none of that stuff.
Right.
She doesn't care. And even if you did show the fallacy in any of those sort of arguments or whatever, she'd be like, "Okay, I don't care. I believe what I believe, and I'm going to believe it, and not you or no other atheist or no other person is going to come along and separate me from my relationship with Jesus." Okay?
Right.
So just get out of my face with all that. You
Right.
know, these
but
people
she
don't.
can think exactly the same thing about you, Scott. She can
Yeah,
think, well, um, you will not give up your atheism
right.
at any cost, right?
Right. So she could say the same thing. So I actually put a video about that together, like the inconsistency on both sides. Like a lot of atheists, and you'll hear, and I know Tangelo, you probably hear a lot about this from a lot of atheists, is some Christians will always point to like some personal experience in their life as a reason for their faith. And they're not really trying to use those arguments to convince people, but they're just kind of like there also. It's not just one thing that convinces a Christian into it, but mainly it's because they had a personal relationship with God, that experience. And so the atheist likes to come along and say, well, that's a fallacy. You can't really base your beliefs on an experience. It's just a personal experience. You could be wrong, you could be deluded, you could be a brain in the vat. All of these outlandish things could be true, you know, but then you'll notice that most atheists, if you listen to their story, they came out of the church. Like me, they're people that were used to be Christians. And why did they leave? Because of a bad experience. So, like
That's what I
Otangelo just
mostly
said,
hear.
right? That's
Yeah,
what you
that's what
hear.
I mostly hear.
That's what they
And
always
I
say.
al- and what I always point out, if you left your faith in the Bible and in Jesus because you see contradictions in the Bible or because you made a bad experience in the church, well, I'd say this isn't a good reason to become an atheist.
Hmm. Right. You know, it's like
And I would say
you have
it
to be
depends on the
consistent.
person. I think everyone has their own thought processes. What might be enough for one person is not enough for another.
Well, the question
Right.
is not what is enough or what is not enough. The question is, what are good reasons to become an atheist? All right? Because there are good reasons and there are bad reasons. Because one, I think we all agree on something is true. And if we are doing the dichotomy, either the Christian God is actually true or it's not true. It
Hmm.
cannot be both at the same time. So
Hmm.
Yeah.
something is the truth. And the
Hmm.
question is, what is it? What is most likely true? That's what we all want to know,
The
right?
the only thing I would add to that, Otangelo, is it doesn't have to be just the Christian God
Yeah, of
or
course. Yeah.
atheism. It could
No,
be the
Right.
no.
Right.
Christian
It can
God
be
or
another
another,
kind of deity.
yeah,
Certainly. I agree
another
with you
or
on that.
another God.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. But at the bottom level, there are just two buckets. There are just two worldviews. Either a deity exists or does not exist, right? So, independently if it is the Christian God or the gods from Hindu religion or whatever. But
Hmm.
I mean, either God is at the bottom of reality or it's not. Now, saying, well, I've been disappointed by the pastor, so I'm leaving the church, I become an atheist. I mean, that doesn't say anything about what is actually true.
Yeah,
Right.
I think we all agree on that.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Like
and and
I
and
don't think that's a reason for someone to leave their faith, but I do think it's a reason for them to try to be a solution to cleansing the people in these big churches. You know, it's not a matter of they have to leave their faith at all. It's just a matter of speaking out and and doing something before it goes on and on and on, because it's the fact that these things go on for decades that really is bothersome to me.
but I think it's
Well,
very
what I've
important too to make sure you argue what Otangelo was arguing too, though, because at the same time, the fallout from all that is going to be people leaving the church and leaving the church for bad reasons, like switching their worldviews for wrong reasons that they may one day regret. And so you want to make sure that they're consistent. Like that's the only problem I'm seeing, like with the atheists that argue experiences are not good reasons to be Christians, but then it's good reason to be atheists. That inconsistency is a problem, you know, and that should be brought up along with that topic, I think.
Yeah, and
Well,
I
what I am
think
saying
I
is
think
that
it's either
if you
way
want to know
is
what is
wrong.
true, then you need to have a good epistemological framework in order to investigate reality and then to come to most likely true conclusions, right?
Right. Hmm.
And um, I've actually just today finished to write a book which is exposing the theistic worldview, where I go in all these issues. And also, you mentioned fine tuning and uh, scientific questions, origin of life and consciousness, and fine tuning of the universe, origin of the universe, and logical fallacies, which I very commonly see being committed by atheists, right? And I think if someone wants to justify atheism or naturalism, and it is, I'm saying positive atheism, not just weak atheism, by saying,
Hmm.
well, I just don't believe you, but actually having a consistent opposing worldview to theism, then you need to have good explanations, which actually top theistic explanations in regards of origins. And that's something which I've never seen any atheist providing. I always ask the standard question: how do you explain our existence without the creator? And I'd say 95% of atheists have never thought about that question, and they immediately they confess, well, I don't know. I'm an agnostic. I just don't believe in your God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
Tangelo, isn't that valid for the individual doing that? I mean, you know, like I have thought out most of these arguments for God, and I think I've thought them out pretty well. But a lot of people don't. All right, a lot
Well,
of
the
people
thing
don't
is
even
not
take
figuring
time.
out why the God hypothesis is not sound, but asking, well, why is the no God hypothesis sound?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's a
and I
different question. And then you have to ask, well, okay, if it wasn't God that made the universe, was there a multiverse?
right.
If it wasn't God that made life, was it random chance because you cannot invoke evolution? Well,
Yes.
if God didn't make humans with consciousness, well, then where does consciousness come from? Did matter through evolution suddenly create a brain, and then suddenly it became conscious and started to have understanding of the laws of logic? I mean, then you start to realize that naturalism has very, very big difficulties to explain and answer these questions.
Well, I
Yeah.
I think you're right about that, but I
Absolutely.
also think in a practical way it doesn't matter for most people. Like, most
Well,
people either they believe in something like the Christian God or they don't. And I don't think that many people go that deep into it, you know? Like someone like we
yes.
do, like right here, we go pretty deep into it, right? I go pretty deep into it because I really want to think about it. You
Well,
do,
the thing is, if you ask some atheist YouTubers, they will answer you, well, even if you are right, and even if the Christian God is the true God, I despise that guy because of the
right,
things that you guys were talking about of slavery and
right.
genocide in the Old Testament and Noah's flood and drowning babies and all this stuff. So for them, it makes actually no difference if the evidence points to the Christian God or not, because they will not convert anyway.
Yeah, they don't have an interest in the
Right.
Christian.
Yes.
In that
But
story of God. Yeah.
isn't that just something that's a human thing? Some may have an interest in that, some may not, you
That's
know.
why we have free will. And I believe that God gave us free will so we could decide how we want to live our lives. And many people, they say, well, I just want to live my life autonomously. I don't care about God's above me, and that's it. And God respects it, and He gives us the possibility to live our ways that way.
I think I fit in that category. Like I think I'm in that category. Like I don't much consider I consider God from an intellectual perspective, and I find it fascinating, and I find it interesting, all that, and I love talking about it, you know, but in actuality, in my everyday life, once I get off the internet, I'm not thinking about God at all. So, you know, it's
Of
not
course,
it's not
nobody
like
does. No
like
Christian or any one of us thinks all the time about God. I mean, we have
Mm-hmm.
other interests besides God, of course, right? But I mean, it is a relevant issue because it relates to our existence and deep questions in regards of human existence. Why are we here? Where did we come from? Where do we go? What is the meaning of life? Is there a God? And if there is one, who is Him? And what are His reasons for having created us? There are tons of questions which are, I think, intellectually
Oh, I think he
yeah.
dropped. For me,
He's from
it
Brazil.
yeah,
It's a
Brazil,
long
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
long connection. But
absolutely.
what
Like
what
I
I'm
was gonna,
trying to say is
yeah,
the on as far as like having a deep interest in these things. There's
yeah,
Be
different
very
like ways you have an interest in this. It's intellectually, it's as a hobby, it's as a study, it's as an interest. But then there's the everyday application,
stimulating
you know?
to think about and to ponder.
yeah. For some people, that geek out on the Bible and geek out on religion, world religions, and the concepts of God, this stuff provides them a lot of joy, kind of like ufologists and people like that. People that
Yes.
get into history, people that get into anything, really any topic you could imagine. People get into these things, and it becomes their, hobby. And
Yes.
but it's not for everybody. Some people, it just for some reason it just doesn't resonate with them, and it doesn't matter until it does, until the day that it does matter. And I've heard people say that. Not everybody. I'm not saying everybody one day it's going to matter. Like you're on your deathbed. Oh, now what am I going to do? I ignored God all this long, and now I'm on my deathbed. Shit, I should have paid more attention. I
Right.
mean, there's people that tell you those stories, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that doesn't account for everybody. But for me, I enjoy talking about the concept of God. Where I'm at now, like I said, I'm pretty agnostic on most things. Ultimately, um, I don't really, but I have my own stories that make sense to me about creation and about these things that sort of fit, and I'm open to other explanations. And if the Christian God narrative made sense to me, I would be open to it. And but honestly, the stories that I hear that I've ever heard really don't, at least from the fundamentalist side. Now, as far as there's other people like Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy that sort of marries in like some naturalistic data points with sort of the Christian story and how it all can fit, and that's really great. And I'm sure, and I've come up with a lot of different imaginary scenarios that could make it all make sense. But at the end of the day, I know to myself, it's just ad hoc. It's like I'm trying to imagine ways for it to make sense. But
Hmm.
does it really true though? Like, you know what I'm saying? And that's where I have to fall back and be humble and say, well, I'm just making this stuff up. I'm just kind of making it make sense internally. It can be
Right.
internally consistent and still be untrue.
Right.
So I'm kind of just agnostic but open. And sometimes I'm a agnostic believer, but most of the time I'm agnostic, you know, on the fence person.
Well, like we all want to have mental well-being. We all want to have peace of mind, right? At least most people. I know that's been a pursuit of mine, peace of mind.
That's
That's
right.
probably what led me into Christianity, and it's also what led me out of Christianity. It kind of was both, you know. But but I always feel like peace of mind is a critical thing for us to have as human beings,
Yeah,
right?
you're not going to operate very effective without it. And you know, you know my story. I've dealt a long time ago with anger issues and anxiety and depression and things like that, were my challenges. And religion used to kind of put a band-aid on it for a while until it didn't work with me anymore. And then I was kind of out there without any sort of anchor, and I was just an angry atheist who was mean and violent and all of this stuff. So that didn't work for me either. So I had to find out what worked for me, and I had to come up with my own philosophy and my own, borrowed ideas from much smarter people than me to come up with ideas that might make sense and come up with stories that can kind of put me at peace and make my life a little better. And I think we all have to do that. And some people's way is going to be just the total disconnection from the God concept, period. Like, just some people focus on, and I'm not saying it's healthy, but some people become workaholics
Right.
Some people become all in their marriage and all in their family. It's all they
Right.
care about. Or some people get into their sport, or whatever. Some people drink, do drugs, all kinds of unhealthy things, porn, you name it. People do all kinds of things. Everybody's looking for that same thing, man. They're looking for that peace. They're looking for
Right.
that place where they don't have to think so much, and their mind doesn't have to ruminate.
Right.
And we're all looking for that.
Yes. And that's the thing. But I think as an atheist or an agnostic, we can better recognize that that might look different for different people.
Absolutely.
Whereas I
Absolutely.
think when you're totally into a particular religion, you really you see it as your way is the only way,
Yes, that's the
and
ego.
and and
Yep.
that's where I just have a problem with that.
Me too, man. That's why I never preach anything that works for me. I have it. I can explain it to anyone that wants to hear it. It's out. I put a whole channel together for it. But I would never encourage anybody to listen to what the fuck I have to say about it. I mean, if you want to listen and you like what you hear, fine. But it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with you and
Yeah,
what works for you. And I would never try to tell somebody how to live their life or how to think about life or anything like that. That's just for me. Everyone it's only going to matter if they figure it out for themselves. And
exactly. That's
you have
how
to
I
be a
feel.
free thinker. The only thing I would suggest really strongly is be a free thinker. Don't be scared to think outside the box on anything. That's my only thing. Other than that, you come to whatever conclusions works for you. Just
Yeah,
do, just make sure that it's positive, that you
yeah,
leave the world in a better place than when you found it. That's the
yeah.
other thing.
Now, what you're describing, some people would call spiritual,
Yeah.
and I'm okay with that. All right.
Yep.
So if that's spiritual, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just not comfortable with people telling people they have to think this way in order to
Right.
find peace of mind,
My
because
way or the
my
highway. Right.
experience is totally different. You know, I
Yeah.
lived in the Christian world. In my mind was very Christian, and I feel I have much more peace of mind now. All right. So I'm not saying that my way is the only way.
Right.
I'm just saying for me, it works really well. All
And there's
right.
a lot of
And
atheists that do. Unfortunately, there's atheist channels that dedicate themselves to just debunking Christians all day long. That's all they want to do. They
yeah,
want you to call into their show, not
right,
give you a chance to talk
right.
over you, insult you, tell you you have to shut up now. It's my turn to talk,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
then browbeat you into a corner and then hang up on you.
Because
And they
that's
do that
popular.
all day long.
That's very popular to do.
Yep. Yep. They love it, man. And a lot of Christians, some Christians, they call them the precepts, take up that same methodology, only they'd use it in another way. They
Yeah.
presuppose their religion or whatever, and then they browbeat you and they try to
Yeah.
make you feel stupid. And
Yeah.
then,
It definitely goes both ways.
yeah, yeah,
But ultimately, that sort of thing, although maybe entertaining, and that's okay, but it doesn't amount to anything ultimately.
yeah,
Well, the difference is that, I mean, if you are an atheist and trying to convince others that there is no evidence for God, and the other side leaves faith, what does he have to offer in replacing the faith of someone? You are just dragging someone down to unbelief, but hey, what then? And if you see the other side, if I am a confessing Christian and I confess it to others because the Christian faith has brought me positive things, then I am giving others the opportunity actually to experience the same thing that I have experienced. And I think this is a big difference because, I mean, on the other one side, you have someone which is dragging you down to and to nothing, basically, to an empty void. And on the other side is someone that offers you something which has actually a lot to bring positively.
Yeah.
Well, Tangelo, I want to share something with you regarding that. All right, because I think it's an interesting thing. All right, and yes, if all an atheist does is tell people they shouldn't believe in God, and that's their whole thing, it's not amounting to anything, right? And I agree with you. I mean, so somebody decides they're not believing in God anymore. All right, that's yeah, I see your point there. All right, but there are other things other than atheism, other mental, psychological ways that a person can go that for people that are atheists that can lead them down the road to betterment, to living a better life, to being a better person. And those things may not be as popular as arguing religion, right? And I'm dealing with that, trying to start this little channel. I mean, I made one post that was about people who are leaving religion, finding peace of mind elsewhere. But most of my posts are just debating Christianity, right?
Yeah.
And I I want to do more posts about finding peace, finding bettering your own life, being more of an inspiration or an answer for people rather than just taking something away from them.
Well, see,
So,
my 2 cents on that is that there's kind of going to have to be a paradigm shift in that regard, because here, and I only speak from my experience and from what most or a lot of Christians have told me, and Muslims too. I had a Muslim friend tell me this too. If it weren't for my faith, then where am I going to go? What's going to fill that void? I've got
right,
like a Jesus-sized hollow hole in my heart now. So what am
exactly.
I going to fill that with? And atheism provides absolutely nothing.
Yeah, nothing.
All it really does is it leads what a lot of people feel it can lead to, a meaningless, purposeless, nihilistic sort of life. And so they'll say that, you're leading me into destruction, psychologically. I
Right,
have nothing to really anchor myself to. So a lot of people have this paradigm where, look, if God created this whole universe just so we could live 80 years and die and go into the void and the universe goes into a nothingness, then life has no meaning. It has no purpose. It has nothing. You might as well kill yourself. But see, that's kind of like the paradigm shift comes in when you have to point out that, that's kind of like, why would you go to see an orchestra play? It's going to end, right? It's going to end after what, an hour or so? And then what was the whole point of going to see the orchestra play? It's because in that moment was where the meaning was. It's about living in the moment, living in the present. And so you
right,
have to kind of put a value on that somehow. You have to help these people see that, um, be comfortable with death. Be comfortable with, you know, another path other than Christianity. It could entail God, or it could entail no God, or it could entail something in between, something like a God or something. There's all kinds of creative ways to find, you know, meaning, purpose, and hope in your life. Some people find it in pure atheism, just the fact that, hey, I'm going to live good. I'm only going to live to be 70 or 80. Good. I don't want to live past that, because why would I want to? I want to live here and now and enjoy it here and now. And what gives me hope, meaning, and purpose is to debate Christians all day. And
right.
That's
that's what they
basically
find that, you
But
know.
that's basically the only escape that you have. So if you are leaving Christianity, which actually there is a God which made us for a purpose, and I believe that the purpose is that God loves us, that we can love Him back, knowing Him, and that we have love amongst each other. I think this is the deepest meaning of everything. But if you remove that, if you remove a deity which made us, then the only escape that you have to fill that is that you try to yourself finding reasons to exist, to live, and then you will make anything um, to be meaningful for you. Like as you said, eventually going to listen to an orchestra and enjoying
And
it
it
or
ends right.
whatever. But in the bigger picture, the truth is that the universe doesn't care a shit about how we live, right?
Right, right. And
Well,
so
here,
this is the point I was going to make is that remember these people have already decided they don't believe in God for whatever reason. Like,
right.
they're already convinced of that. That's why they're leaving to begin with. Now that they've
Yeah.
left, they have to find something. And
Yeah,
if they just can't wrap their head around the concept that you're offering, the God of
yeah.
love that has purpose, meaning for their life, then they're going to have to find something else. And that's where, that conversation comes in. But go ahead,
Yes.
Lou.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I pretty much what I was thinking. I mean, atheism in and of itself doesn't offer very much.
It offers you
No, it
nothing.
doesn't.
There's
Nothing.
nothing there, and I'm an
Exactly.
atheist, and I understand that. All right, so that's true, but there are other ways to find peace of mind and to find purpose in your life other than Christianity or a different religion, and that's the part I don't think a lot of Christians even get that because they find their peace of mind through their faith. That's their anchor. That's what they hold on to. But if you're not holding on to that anymore, like Scott says, that's when you may look to other areas to find this peace.
And it's going to
Right?
have to be a no
It's a
God.
it's a logical follow up because in the end of the day we all want to have a meaningful life.
Yeah.
Nobody of us wants to live simply for no reason at all right?
Hmm.
Right.
So you have to I mean, in order for you to have a happy life you need to have meaning. And if it doesn't come from God, then it has to come from somewhere else. Then you'll try to find it and replace it by yourself.
Yeah. And
Yes.
then we agree on that. It's just
The
I
expectation has to change. Like
yeah.
you can't
I
you can't
mean,
if you're going to abandon if you've already abandoned the possibility of the Christian God being really true, then the only alternative is to say, well, I probably just need to get used to that this is the only life I'm going to live, and you have to make peace with that.
yes.
And there's different ways to make peace with that people find peace, meaning, and happiness through it. In fact, it could be said, it could be argued that people that know their life span is shorter than they expected actually have more meaningful lives because they understand that they're not going to live forever. They understand they're not going to live maybe for the next 5 years, or I'm not going to live in 9 months. My doctor's given me only 9 months to live, say. That person may find a lot more meaning in every
Yes.
moment that he's alive than someone who doesn't even think about it. You know what I'm
But
saying?
the problem is that you cannot enter it anywhere. You have just to make it up and then to believe that this is actually the meaning that's why we are here. But the
Right.
question is if you investigate it further, is that actually true?
Well, yeah, of course, but again, we're talking about a scenario where a person is
Yeah.
already convinced that there is no God. There's this Christianity. I've left it because it's not really true.
Right.
Um, with a person like that, they're gonna have. It's like you said. There's only one logical way to go at that point. You better be at peace with living this life, like Paul said, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we will die." That's the lot. That's what he was talking about. The logical situation is that, and you can
Yeah.
find meaning in that. Now, it's not going to be as sexy as living forever in heaven and all of this kind of stuff. But you might say, well, why would a person not want to believe that and opt out for the lesser, the less sexy, idea? Well, it's because they're not convinced. Because some people can't fake belief. Like they could say, well,
Right.
I don't really believe it. And so if I don't believe it, I can't really be happy being a Christian because I know it's not really true. And
Right.
so it doesn't really matter for them. That's why they're willing to leave
Yeah.
because they already know I've been faking it for the last year or two, and I might as well just leave. I'm already happy knowing I'm going to
Yeah.
die, and.
Yeah. I think we all agree atheism in and of itself is not offering anyone hope. All right. The only
Hmm.
thing I'm trying to explain to Atangelo is no, atheism doesn't offer hope, but it's other things that offer you hope outside of God.
Yeah,
Right. And that's where someone like me has come to find peace.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Without God.
Oh yeah,
It's not
Well,
that
you can have
atheism makes me
you
happy.
can have hope in this life, in future events that you hope that they will be realized, and that they will make you happy. They will bring you moments of happiness and satisfaction. Of course, yes, that is a possibility.
Yeah. And for someone like me and other atheists who go through, what you might, I hate the word spiritual because I don't believe in spirits, but a journey of trying to find peace of mind after God, after you leave the faith. There's a
But
lot
you,
of ways to go about doing that.
but
Uh,
the thing is that whatever you can achieve as an atheist, there is nothing that tells me that I cannot achieve it as a Christian.
hmm
And on top of that, I can have peace with God and forgiveness through what Christ did for me and hope for eternal life.
yes, and that's
yes.
that's part of what I would say too is that if you're a Christian and you're convinced, and it's really providing a positive psychology for you, like it's
Yeah.
it's it's giving you that meaning, hope, and purpose, and you're not hurting anybody, I say go for it.
Yeah.
Like for me, I feel a lot more peaceful now since I've left religion but that's just me, and
Yeah.
I've grappled, like my thing says Scott non-dualist, right? Like I've explored non-dualism for like the last 10 years and have come to really find an anchor in that philosophy and in that spirituality, even though it doesn't necessarily involve ghosts and spirits in that way,
Right.
more like in the Eastern um, definition. But, basically, when it comes to life after death, for me, I kind of feel like, my ego has died a number of times already. I've watched it die. I've watched my own ego die. So death really doesn't bother me so much because really that's what we're talking about. When people talk about I get to live forever in heaven, it's like, who is the I we're talking about? Is it this construction that you've created, this self-awareness? Well, your thoughts and your ideas, they change. We were talking about that earlier. Everything that exists in reality always changes. So it's all an illusion. It's just not really real. It's just real as an experience. So the only thing that really exists with each and every one of us is an experience. You're experiencing your thoughts, your faith, your non faith, your suffering, your good times, your bad times. So, as a non dualist, I would say that it's just kind of like a spiritual concept that asserts that there's no fundamental separation or distinction between this idea of self, the other, and nature. We're all just nature. We're a process of nature. And it's going to continue well after my little ego dies. My ego is not that important that it should live forever. It's going to pass away, it's going to go. And experience, though, continues somewhere. That aspect, that observer aspect that doesn't ever change, that thing always stays. But the one thing that I know that always does change is our minds. Our minds always change. our beliefs change, our personality, our character. We're not the same person we were 5 years ago. You know.
Yeah. And the thing is, a Christian that is finding that peace of mind and it's a positive in their lives, I stay away from them. I mean, pretty much. I'm not trying to um, take that away from them. I mean, I've encountered Christians. I have one in my mind, or a couple in my mind, that I have felt that their whole mental stability hangs on their belief in God. And
Yeah.
I don't want to take that from them. So I completely stay away from those conversations. Okay. Because I'm actually like, oh my gosh, if I talk them out of their belief in God, their whole life might crumble, you
Yeah.
know, because there's nowhere for them to go. And then I would feel bad about that. I really would, because I'd be like, I'm the one who took that from them.
I had
So
a
I
Christian tell me that if it wasn't for belief in God, people would murder, rape, and kill
right,
all day long and pillage. And so for him, he stays believing because he doesn't want to
right.
be that person. And my advice to him is, please stay a Christian. Then, if that's
That's
what's
what I'm
keeping you
saying.
from
Right.
raping my daughter,
Right.
then please, by all means, I'll buy you a Bible today.
Right. And I know some mentally ill, borderline people that it seems like their faith is what keeps them on the right side of that.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah,
not going to come in there
I
and
have,
try to
I
take that
have a
from them.
hard, I have a hard problem to accept or to believe what you just said, Scott. That
Yeah.
our consciousness. I am a dualist, and I think therefore I am. So I think that my thoughts they are very, very real, and they aren't the same as physics because I mean atoms and physical things they operate based on physical laws, but intentions and motivations and thoughts um, are fundamentally different things.
Oh, this
And
is
I
where me
can
and Otangelo are going to get along great, man. Well, I agree with you 100% on that. I actually do. When I say I'm a non-dualist, like a monist, I don't mean like a physicalist monist. So I'm with you, man. I believe that the material world are appearances in our conscious experience, and so if you really study matter deeply, it's really a mathematical construct, and that means it's an abstraction. And
well,
math doesn't cause anything. It's just it's a description of things. So
well,
it's
maybe you
real
have
easy. Go ahead, I'm
maybe
sorry.
you have read a little bit too much Max Tegmark, which brings that
No, I don't.
hypothesis that
Yeah, I don't
everything
believe
is a
him either.
mathematical
No,
construct. But
I'm disagreeing with that. I'm disagreeing
yeah,
with that. What I'm
but
saying is,
I have actually studied the physics and what matter is made of, and I think you guys know that matter is made of energy, Einstein's equation. But then the question is, well, what is energy? We
right, there
can
you go.
we can well describe what energy does,
Right.
but in substance, explaining what actually energy is, this is something that physicists they don't have an
They'd
answer
have
to
no
that.
answer. Bingo. Now you're with me on 10. That's what I'm saying. That's what I mean by non-dualism, is that what we experience is the same thing. We're experiencing consciousness, and experience. And what I mean by consciousness isn't just the meta-conscious, like the thinking and the ruminating, but also just the experience, what it's like to be something. And when we, look at matter, material, energy, we don't know what it is. We just know what it does in the appearance of our observations. And all observations are done in consciousness. So consciousness
Yeah.
is primary in that case. And I understand there's that can lead people to a theistic sort of view. Me, I'm sort of agnostic on whether the ultimate mind is God's mind or whether it's just the natural, kind of like deistic type of thing. Because And I have a few reasons that I wrestle with, like the problem of evil is one of the main ones. But even that though has an answer. I'm not even gonna lie to you. As a non-dualist, I see that evil is sort of necessary for good to even exist. So,
Well, I think it is necessary in order to understand what good is, which
right.
evil is the absence of good. But um, I have actually written a philosophical paper on that issue because there is also the problem to go from matter to consciousness, but the opposite is also a problem. How do you go from consciousness to matter, right?
Hmm.
So the proposition God created the physical universe ex nihilo, it is very problematic.
Yeah.
So I thought about that, and I think that actually God has eternal power at his disposition, which is not actualized, but that he can actualize at any moment. So his power has eternally coexisted with him, and at the moment that he decided, he actualized it, and that solves the problem of creation ex nihilo, because God's power was always there. And since power and energy is the same as physical matter,
Here's
then
my question.
this
Here's my question to you though. Did God do that out of a free will choice, or did God do that out of his nature?
I think it was a free will choice.
Okay. Why did God choose to create?
I think anything that God does, he does out of love, because he is love.
Mm. So if God, so was God incomplete before he created, or did he need to create in order to be more perfect, to be more loving and create? And it,
No, no. I believe, as the Christian tradition says, in a triune God, three persons, one substance. I cannot explain it. If you ask me how is that possible, then I'll tell you I have no idea. It seems paradoxical and illogical, and maybe it really is. But
could
uh,
be true though. That's where I'm at. I'm open that the God could have volitionally done it, like out of free will. My question is, if God is perfect, if God is complete, and He's all love and all perfect and all of that, then He would have no need or want to do any kind of creation. But if I was to posit that this God is more of a naturalistic sort of just a nature, then it just does it out of necessity. It just does it because that's God's nature to do it. And so, in a way, we humans, any sentient being is sort of like a fractal, like we're a chip off the old block. But the old block doesn't necessarily have to be free will and metaconscious and worries about smiting the Philistines and answering prayers and being personal. And then that way, the hard problem of consciousness dissolves, and then also the problem of evil dissolves, because it just is what it is, and it's just neutral rather than all loving. Yet we have evil and all of this kind of stuff as a requirement, for reality. So it kind of fits, but I'm not saying that I necessarily believe that's absolutely true. I'm just saying that makes sense to me.
yeah, since God is characterized as loving, you cannot have just one person eternally existing, because in order there to be love, there has to be at least two persons, right?
Right, right.
And and so that's why I believe that the concept of a triune God makes actually sense, because there were three persons which were enjoying themselves eternally.
Did he
Now,
create those three people on his free will, or is that just his nature to be three different people in
no,
one?
I believe that God, as the concept of three persons, one essence, was not created, and it couldn't be, because otherwise there would have to be something beyond and before that God, and then it wouldn't be God, and that other thing would be God, right? So God has to be ultimate, and in order to be ultimate, he cannot be created. He has to have always existed.
So on that aspect, it seems like we're saying the same thing. It's just maybe a little semantically different. So I could say that God created all beings. He didn't just limit it to three things. He actually created billions and billions, who knows how many sentient creatures in the universe, including spirit creatures like angels or aliens or whatever you want to call them. All sentient beings, including us, are here in order for God to love, in order for there to be a space, a symmetry for love, like the yin and the yang, right? Like you have to have evil to define good and vice versa. Otherwise, it's meaningless, you know. And so, in that, the only question I have is, I think he didn't do this not necessarily purposely, like, I'm God, I'm sitting here by myself. I think I'm going to create all these people so I can experience what it's like to be me. No, I think it just fell out naturally. That's just the nature of reality itself, to fractal off. Even some science sort of promotes that idea, like the holographic universe and different
Well,
things. I don't
I
know.
mean, I think a good illustration is that I don't know if you guys are dead. I am father of an 11-year
Yeah,
old girl. I mean, if you ask why are you putting a child on earth with all the problems, right?
mm-hmm.
So, so it is difficult actually to say why we are doing this.
Yep.
And maybe with God, it might be kind of similar, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I kind of feel like that too. Like, sometimes I wonder at times, like, if God is all knowing and he knows all of these hard problems that people go through, like, like a child born with syphilis and they die 3 weeks later, what was the point in that? What was the purpose in that? And you might say, well, there has to be a space for that kind of cruelty. Otherwise, there would not be a space for people to cure syphilis and express love in that way of curing these diseases and being the hero. You have to give people a challenge. But that's not a very comforting thing to tell a mother of their dead child. I could never go in there and say, well, actually, it's a good thing that your child died because it served a greater purpose. If you think about it, that's not really going to be satisfying. And if I'm not really consistent to be able to say that to someone's face, I don't think I could really hold that as a true belief to me. But I may be wrong. That may just be part of the fallout from being a limited mind, in a huge
No,
universe.
I am with you. There are questions which I personally I prefer to um, not answering them.
Yep.
Like they asked, well, why to William Craig? Why did God permit that all these children of the Canaanites would be killed? Because they were innocent. They had no guilt, right?
Hmm.
And then he answered and said, well, but hey, they are in heaven now. It's great for them. And he was heavily criticized, and I think for good. I mean, if that is the logic, then why don't we just put
Abort all babies. Yeah.
babies on the earth to kill them because they are going to heaven? I mean, that's absurd.
Right.
But there are things, questions in this sense that I prefer not to answer because I really have not a good answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
With that question that William Lane Craig answered in that way, could we not also then say abortion is a good thing because those
Yeah,
babies, fetuses go straight
Logically,
to heaven?
if we're taking it
yeah.
logically, I think
You
that's
know,
what it's kind of
That
what
that
Otangelo was saying
that
is that
that opens an entire wormhole of
yeah.
questions.
Exactly. And who wants to open that up, right? Yeah, we don't like to open up those kind of questions because you'll
Yeah,
never get to the bottom of it. And that
right,
that's why
right.
that's why I say it's this stuff is it's really deep. It can be confusing, it can be challenging, but it's all worth pondering.
Yeah,
hey, I made a video pertaining at least to portion of this, and I don't know if it's that smart or anything, but I would invite both of you guys to at least watch it. It was my last video. I put it up this morning. and it's about, God prior to the creation, right? And it
Hmm.
is essentially is what was he doing, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's just, what was he doing before he created things? Because there was an eternity, right? It wasn't like it was 1,000 years or 2,000 years. It's an
Hmm.
Yeah,
entire
that's well. The
eternity.
question is, I mean, was that eternity timeless? Because if it was indeed timeless, because physics says that time was created when the universe started with change. If God existed in a timeless, changeless realm, then that means as well, I mean, if he was having thoughts, that would already be a change. So he wouldn't have even thoughts, right? It would be completely static.
Right.
So
Well,
so
I
it
struggle
it
with
is mind-boggling. I mean, it goes beyond what I think we can actually understand.
I
Maybe there
struggle
were
with
different dimensions where there was time actually, but it wasn't this dimension. And I mean, string theory and so forth, they talk about different dimensions. And I mean, we are going into metaphysics, which there you can speculate all day long.
Hmm.
I struggle with just the concept of eternity. Like that's a concept that I can't really grasp, you
You
know.
know, well, there's a funny story. Einstein, Albert Einstein came up with his theory of general relativity, and when he promoted his idea, of course, all the philosophers laughed him out of town because he's trying to take a concept like time and turn it into some kind of real thing, like it's just a concept, it's not a real thing. But then later on he proved that you can bend time, and so they all just kind of got defeated at that moment. But part of what spun off on that was that, well, if this is true, then you're going to have something called time dilation, and you're going to have gravitational waves, and you're going to have all these other predictions that we don't see. You should see a background radiation in the cosmos, and you should see all we don't see any of these things, but it's all theoretical. Of course, all of these things were later confirmed as true, supporting the theory of general relativity, right? But part of what came out of that too was this idea of the block universe, the eternal universe theory, where time in the universe, all events are like in a block of frozen ice, if you will. It's like
Yeah,
all
beat time.
events, yeah, B theory of time. And so when you talk about eternal in terms of temporal before the universe, it just doesn't really make sense. You
Yeah,
know,
if you take the B theory of time as granted, which I don't, I think that indeed past time has passed, present is the present, and the
hmm
future is indeed the future. So I don't think that this concept, if thought true, makes sense. I
and it
mean, there
has a
are some
problem.
physicists, yeah, which promote it still today,
Yeah,
but I'm not convinced that this is true.
yeah, it has a problem tying in quantum mechanics too. So it's got a few things that it's not accounting for. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm agnostic on that too. But it's just interesting thought.
Well, anyway, guys, I gotta go. My
Yeah.
girlfriend came
I
home, and
was going to say the same
I
thing
gotta
right
get to
now.
dinner. Right. As always, I appreciate you coming by. All right.
Yeah.
Anyone in chat, please subscribe. I'm trying to build this up little by little, and any subscribers helps. Any comments, any likes. So add that if you can, and thank you for coming by. Thank you for the discussion, and hope to see you again, guys.
All right. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Thanks. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Bye bye.